2 minutes left, Tyler. I tapped the glass of my phone screen. The digital numbers flipped. 1 minute, 59 seconds. I pushed the manila folder an inch closer to his shaking hands. Sign the paper, or Dad goes to federal prison. The soundproof glass of the VIP suite blocked out the music from the gala below, but it did nothing to muffle my mother. Brenda knelt on the carpet, her designer dress pooled around her legs. Her tears stained the silk. She clutched my brother's jacket hem, begging him to do the one thing he had never done in his entire life: take a loss. Tyler stared at the contract. The custom Mont Blanc pen Richard had bought him to sign billion-dollar deals trembled between his fingers. He looked across the mahogany table, hoping to find the quiet, obedient sister he grew up with. He only found the CEO of the company that now owned him. I leaned back in my chair. 1 minute, 40 seconds. Welcome to Aura Vengeance, where we tell stories about the math of family loyalty and what happens when the scapegoat finally audits the books. If you have ever been the child expected to shrink so someone else could shine, drop your age in the comments and hit subscribe. You will want to stay for this one. To understand how I put my mother on her knees and handed my brother a pen that would end his career, you have to go back exactly 1 year, my 30th birthday. I sat at a chipped laminate counter in a cramped Portland apartment, listening to the November rain hit the window. In front of me sat a $3 grocery store cupcake inside a plastic clamshell. The vanilla frosting smelled like artificial vanilla and wax. My phone rested next to it. The screen remained dark. No calls, no texts, not even an automated email from my dentist. Brenda and Richard had missed it again. Growing up in Lake Oswego, the family calendar revolved around Tyler. My brother's birthdays involved catered dinners and $1,200 multi-tiered fondant cakes. Fondant always looked perfect in photos, but tasted like chalk. It was a hollow dessert for a hollow son. My parents never missed his milestones. My milestones usually warranted a text 3 days late asking if I needed $20 for groceries. They believed I was a struggling administrative assistant working a dead-end job. I let them believe it. I sat in the dim light of my kitchen and ate my cheap cupcake. My laptop sat open next to the plastic clamshell. The screen displayed the final back-end framework for a supply chain software platform I had spent 4 years building from scratch, Artemis Logistics. We were operating in stealth mode. I preferred the silence. Silence meant Brenda did not ask for favors. Silence meant Richard could not sneer and call my ideas bad investments. Silence let me build the empire they did not know they needed to fear. I struck a match and lit the single cheap candle sticking out of the frosting. The flame reflected in my dark phone screen. I blew it out and watched the smoke curl toward the water-stained ceiling. I opened a new email from my co-founder. The subject line consisted of 3 words: SEC approval granted. We were taking the company public. Exactly 365 days after I sat alone with that grocery store cupcake, the air inside the Artemis Logistics executive suite felt thin. 30 of my lead engineers, directors, and early investors stood around the central command monitors in our Portland headquarters. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Oregon rain washed the city gray. Inside, the lights were bright and the tension hummed like a live wire. I held a crystal flute of sparkling water. I did not drink. I just watched the digital ticker. When the opening bell rang in New York, the cheer that erupted in my office rattled the glass walls. Artemis Logistics officially entered the New York Stock Exchange. We priced our initial public offering at $34 a share. By 10 in the morning, the line on the graph spiked like a frightened heartbeat. By noon, it settled at $112. I stood perfectly still and did the math in my head. 9 figures. The silence of that cramped apartment a year ago felt like a lifetime away. I smoothed the lapel of my tailored emerald suit. I had built an empire in the shadows, and now the world was turning on the lights. My personal cell phone vibrated against the polished mahogany of the conference table. I had kept the same phone number since college. For a decade, that number only rang when my dentist confirmed an appointment or when Richard needed someone to pick up his dry cleaning because Tyler was too busy resting. Now the screen lit up with an endless stream of notifications. 47 missed calls. I unlocked the screen. Every single notification bore the same name, Brenda. I walked away from the cheering crowd, stepping into my private office and closing the heavy glass door. The sudden quiet pressed against my ears. I pressed play on the first voicemail. My mother's voice echoed through the small speaker. She was crying. These were not the sharp, panicked tears of a real emergency. This was the soft, rhythmic weeping of a woman performing a monologue for an audience. "Madison, sweetie." Her voice trembled, hitting carefully practiced notes of maternal affection. "We saw the news on the television. Your father and I are just so proud of you. I miss my little girl. Please call us. We want to celebrate our daughter." I let the recording finish. The words hung in the sterile air of my office. I miss my little girl. I walked over to the window and looked down at the Portland traffic. I tried to find a memory of her missing me. I remembered my college graduation. I walked across the stage to receive my degree alone because Tyler had a mild sinus infection and Brenda could not bear to leave him unsupervised. I remembered my 25th birthday when she called me to ask what gift I planned to buy Tyler for his promotion. Wealth possesses a strange, unnatural gravity. It pulls in the people who spent years pretending you did not exist. When someone ignores you for 10 years, their sudden affection does not feel like love. It feels like a threat. Before I could delete the voicemails, the glass door to my office swung open. David, my general counsel, did not knock. He did not carry a champagne flute, and his jaw was locked tight. He held an iPad gripped tight in his right hand. "We have a situation," he said. His voice dropped the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. I turned away from the window. "What kind of situation?" David slid the tablet across the pristine surface of my desk, read the headline. I looked down. The screen displayed a freshly published article from Silicon Valley Insider, a mid-tier tech blog known for amplifying industry gossip. The bold black font glared back at me. Artemis Logistics founder accused of intellectual property theft by rival tech CEO. I traced my finger down to the subheading. Tyler James, founder of the delivery app Syncroute, claims his sister stole his foundational code to build her newly public empire. I stared at my brother's name. Tyler launched Syncroute 2 years ago. It was a messy, over-designed app that promised to revolutionize local courier services. Richard funded the entire seed round out of his own pocket. Brenda threw a launch party for him that cost more than my annual salary at the time. Tyler bought a leased Porsche before he had acquired a single paying user. At family dinners, he would loudly refer to my logistics software as a cute little spreadsheet project. I read the body of the article. Tyler had given the blog an exclusive interview. He spun a tragic, compelling narrative about a jealous younger sister who took advantage of his brilliant mind. He claimed I copied his proprietary back-end framework while visiting their house for Thanksgiving. The details were absurd. I had not been home for Thanksgiving in 4 years. It was a baseless, transparent lie. But the truth rarely matters on the day of an initial public offering. Perception is currency. If institutional investors smell a lawsuit over intellectual property on the first day of trading, they pull their capital. The Securities and Exchange Commission monitors news cycles closely during a public launch. Rumors of stolen code cause panic. A panic causes a sell-off. The stock price could plummet before the closing bell, erasing millions of dollars in valuation and damaging our reputation permanently. Tyler was watching me succeed on national television, and the reality of it broke his mind. He could not handle the undeniable fact that the sister he mocked had built a functional titan, while his own app floundered in obscurity. He was no longer just an annoying favored sibling. He was actively attempting to destroy my net worth to protect his fragile ego. He would rather burn my life to ash than admit I possessed a sharper mind. The betrayal settled heavy in my chest. This was not the passive neglect of forgotten birthdays. This was a calculated strike. David stood on the other side of my desk. His fingers tapped a rapid rhythm against his thigh. "Do we issue a press release?" he asked. "We can have outside counsel draft a cease and desist letter within the hour. We can threaten to sue the blog for defamation." I looked at the iPad and then at my cell phone. Brenda was calling again. Her name flashed across the screen in bright letters. The Golden Child and the Enabler were working in tandem. One tried to drag me down, while the other tried to reel me in. "No," I said. My voice sounded detached even to my own ears. "A press release looks defensive. A cease and desist letter takes days to enforce and keeps the story in the news cycle. I want a full forensic dive on his company." David frowned. "On Syncroot." "Yes," I said. "Pull his public filings. Find out who his investors are. Audit his user metrics and his debt load. If he wants to play games with corporate lawyers, let him see what a real legal team can uncover. Find the crack in his armor. I want leverage so heavy he has to publicly retract the article by tomorrow morning." David nodded and grabbed the iPad. "Give me 2 hours." I watched him leave the office. I sat down in my leather chair and let the phone ring. Tyler thought he was clever. He thought throwing a stone at my window would shatter the glass. But when my legal team went digging to stop his defamation campaign, they did not just find leverage. They uncovered a secret buried so deep inside his corporate filings that it threatened to tear the foundation of our family apart and send our father straight to a federal penitentiary. The digital clock on my desk read 2:15 in the afternoon. The trading floor cameras displayed on my muted television showed brokers in tailored vests shouting across the New York Stock Exchange. Artemis Logistics held steady at $114 a share. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I sat in the silent vacuum of my office and stared at my personal cell phone. The screen illuminated with a new notification. It was not another voicemail from Brenda. It was a message in the family group chat. A chat I had muted 3 years ago, but never left. The header read, "The James family." I tapped the notification and opened the thread. Tyler had sent a long paragraph. The tone dripped with the smug, casual arrogance of a man who believed he owned the world. "Just signed a landmark term sheet with a top-tier venture capital firm in the Valley," Tyler wrote. "9-figure exit strategy locked in." Ringing a bell on Wall Street is a cute photo op, Mads, but real tech founders sell the whole ship and cash out private. Drinks are on the new tech billionaire tonight. My breath caught in my throat. A cold shadow dropped over the warmth of my morning success. A 9-figure exit. Venture capital acquisition. The words felt like physical strikes against my ribcage. For a single paralyzing minute, the familiar childhood dynamic snapped back into place. It did not matter how hard I worked or what I built. Tyler always won. He always held the winning hand. The Golden Child seemed bulletproof, operating under a different set of rules, where failure simply did not exist. Before I could even process the claim, a second message popped up. Brenda replied to the group. "We are so proud of our real genius," she typed, adding 3 clapping emojis. "Madison, make sure you congratulate your brother today. He works so incredibly hard and deserves the spotlight." I set the phone face down on the leather blotter. Real genius. I had just taken a logistics platform public, yielding a valuation most founders only dream about. Yet in the eyes of my mother, my brother was the true visionary. He manufactured a private buyout to eclipse my public triumph. He timed the announcement perfectly, ensuring my parents would focus entirely on his phantom success instead of my verified reality. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes. The old script played out exactly as designed. The heavy glass door of my office swung inward. Marcus, my chief financial officer, walked in. David flanked him. Neither man looked like they were attending a celebration. Marcus carried a thick, sealed manila folder under his left arm. He did not ask for permission to sit. He dropped the folder onto the center of my desk. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet room. "You asked for a forensic dive on Syncroot," Marcus said. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and leaned forward. His voice carried the clinical precision of an auditor examining a crime scene. We pulled everything: public filings, debt structures, user acquisition metrics, and vendor accounts. I looked at the folder. Tyler just announced a buyout from a top-tier venture capital firm. Marcus let out a short, harsh laugh. It held zero humor. He did not secure a term sheet, Madison. He secured a death warrant. I sat up straight. Explain. David opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of intercepted emails. In the tech industry, due diligence reports circulate fast if you know which legal channels to tap. Tyler pitched his company to Apex Ventures last month. He promised them a revolutionary user base, 2 million active daily users. He wanted an $80 million valuation. Apex sent in their forensic accounting team to verify the numbers before drafting any official paperwork. Marcus tapped the top of the manila folder. We acquired the Apex rejection dossier. Syncroot is a ghost town. His app does not have 2 million active users. He has maybe 12,000 actual human beings opening that application. The rest is artificial. My brow furrowed. Where is the traffic coming from? Server farms in Eastern Europe, Marcus replied. Tyler has been paying offshore developers to generate synthetic user data, bots pinging his servers 24 hours a day to mimic customer engagement. He burned through his entire seed round trying to buy fake metrics to impress institutional investors. His customer acquisition cost is mathematical suicide. The company is hemorrhaging $200,000 a month in operational costs, and the revenue stream is practically zero. The weight of the truth settled over the room. The boastful text message in the family group chat was a desperate, fabricated illusion. Tyler did not have a 9-figure exit. Apex Ventures ran screaming from the negotiating table the moment they realized the product was hollow. His app was an empty shell wrapped in expensive marketing. The blog post accusing me of intellectual property theft was nothing more than a smokescreen. Tyler leaked the defamation story to distract his remaining minor investors from the undeniable fact that his ship was sinking. If the media focused on a juicy corporate lawsuit, they might not look too closely at his cooked books. David leaned his hands on the edge of my desk. We have enough evidence of corporate fraud here to sink him permanently. I can draft a cease and desist letter right now. We tell him to retract the blog post by midnight, or we forward the Apex dossier to the tech press. He will be a pariah by breakfast. It was the logical move, a clean legal strike to neutralize a threat. But Marcus did not look satisfied. The chief financial officer kept his hand resting on top of the manila folder. The defamation is a minor issue compared to the real problem, Marcus said. His voice dropped an octave. To threaten him with financial exposure, I had to audit his current short-term liabilities. I needed to see who he owed money to. Marcus opened the flap of the manila folder. He slid a dense legal contract across the desk toward me. It was printed on the letterhead of a predatory private equity lender based in Chicago. When Apex Ventures pulled out, Tyler panicked. Marcus explained. He needed capital to keep the servers running and the bots clicking. He could not go to a traditional bank. Traditional banks ask for tax returns. So he went to the shadow market. He secured a mezzanine bridge loan, $1.2 million at an astronomical interest rate. I scanned the dense paragraphs of the loan agreement. You cannot secure a 7-figure bridge loan without hard assets, I said. Tyler leases his car. He rents his luxury apartment. Syncroot does not own any physical real estate. What did he use for collateral? Marcus pointed a blunt finger at the third page of the document. Schedule A, Collateral Assignments. I turned the page. My eyes tracked down the black lines of ink. I stopped breathing. The address printed in the collateral box belonged to a 4-bedroom craftsman house on a quiet, tree-lined street in Lake Oswego. He leveraged your parents' home, David said quietly. I stared at the address. Richard and Brenda had paid off that mortgage 5 years ago. It was their sanctuary, their retirement safety net. The golden child had taken the ultimate symbol of their stability and handed it to a shadow lender in Chicago to fund a fake software company. My parents would never agree to this, I whispered. Richard analyzes every penny he spends. He denied me $500 for a laptop repair in college because it was a bad investment. He would never put the deed to his house on the line for a high-risk tech loan. Marcus slid a magnified photocopy of the signature page across the desk. Look at the authorization line, Madison. Look at your father's name. I picked up the paper. The name Richard James was scrawled across the dotted line in blue ink. But the loops were wrong. The pressure of the pen strokes looked hesitant. It lacked the sharp, aggressive angles my father always used when signing checks. I knew my father's handwriting. I had forged it on enough permission slips in middle school to understand the mechanics of his signature. The manila folder felt heavy in my hands. The true scope of the family delusion fractured right in front of me. Tyler had not just borrowed money. He had committed federal wire fraud. He forged Richard's signature to secure $1 million loan. And based on the late payment penalties highlighted in red ink by my CFO, the lender was preparing to call in the debt. The weeping voicemails from Brenda echoed in my memory. The sudden, desperate need to see her successful daughter. They did not want to celebrate my public offering. They were drowning. And the golden child was the one holding their heads under the water. The blue ink on the photocopy seemed to pulse under the harsh fluorescent lights of my office. I traced the hesitant loops of Richard James with my index finger. The signature was a clumsy imitation, but it was enough to satisfy a predatory Chicago lender eager to secure real estate collateral. My father built his entire identity around financial prudence. He wore sensible shoes, packed his lunch, and lectured me on compound interest. Now his name sat on the final page of a fraudulent mezzanine loan. Marcus watched my face. He knew I understood the gravity of the paperwork. "This is not a simple default," Marcus said softly. "This crosses state lines. The wire transfers originated from a shadow bank in Illinois, hitting an account in Oregon based on a falsified guarantor document. That elevates the situation from a civil contract dispute to federal wire fraud." I kept my eyes on the forged letters. If the lender calls in the debt, they will file a lien against the Lake Oswego house. When the foreclosure proceeds, the local courts will examine the origination documents. The forgery will surface. The federal government does not ignore million-dollar wire fraud. Richard is the guarantor of record, David added. To avoid federal prison, your father would have to swear under oath that his son forged the signature. He would have to hand Tyler over to the authorities. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped my throat. My father would never do that. Richard would let a judge sentence him to a federal penitentiary before he let anyone place handcuffs on his golden boy. He would sacrifice his freedom, his reputation, and his home to protect Tyler's fragile image. I stared at the specific shade of blue ink used for the signature, a rich, vibrant cobalt. It triggered a very specific memory. 6 months prior, I had attended a rare family dinner to observe Tyler's 29th birthday. We sat in the formal dining room of the Lake Oswego house, the same house now sitting on a lender chopping block. Richard stood at the head of the table, holding a black velvet box. He tapped his crystal wine glass with a silver spoon to command the room. He delivered a 5-minute speech about visionary leadership and legacy. Then he opened the box. Resting on white silk was a heavy, custom Mont Blanc fountain pen, black resin wrapped in gold accents. Richard handed it to Tyler with tears shining in his eyes. "This is the pen you will use to sign your first billion-dollar deal," Richard proclaimed. Tyler took the pen, grinning like a victorious king. He uncapped it right there at the dinner table to show off the cobalt blue ink cartridge he had specially ordered. He spent the rest of the evening twirling the heavy instrument between his fingers, mocking my decision to wear a cheap watch. Now, looking at the loan document, I realized the profound irony. Tyler did not use that custom-engraved gift to secure a billion-dollar exit. He used the Mont Blanc pen to forge his father's name and sign away his parents' retirement. The very instrument of his supposed greatness was the tool he used to destroy them. I picked up my cell phone. The screen displayed the notification bubble. 47 missed calls from Brenda. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with sickening clarity. The timeline made perfect sense. The Chicago lender issues a final demand notice when a borrower misses 3 consecutive balloon payments. Tyler had run out of fake metrics to peddle. The cash evaporated. The lender sent the final foreclosure warning to the Lake Oswego address this week. My parents woke up facing the reality of losing their sanctuary and facing a federal indictment. They panicked. Then they turned on the morning news and saw my face projected on the screens in Times Square. They watched me ring the opening bell. They saw the ticker tape showing a 9-figure valuation for Artemis Logistics. My mother's voicemails were never about missing her daughter. The sudden tears, the sweet nicknames, the desperate pleas to reconnect held zero affection. They were drowning in terror. I was no longer the invisible disappointment. I was a life raft floating past their sinking ship. They needed cash to pay off the shadow lender before the foreclosure went public, and the FBI started asking questions about the cobalt blue signature. "They are circling," I whispered. David leaned forward. "We can alert the authorities. We hand this folder to the federal prosecutor and let the chips fall. You owe these people nothing. They treated you like a footnote your entire life. Let them face the consequences of their own financial blindness." I looked at the window. The rain continued to batter the glass. Sending them to prison was the easy route. It was loud and messy and public. But if I let the federal government handle it, Tyler would just spin another narrative. He would play the victim. He would claim the shadow lender tricked him. Brenda and Richard would visit him in a visiting room and tell him he was brave. They would never learn the actual cost of their delusion. "No," I said. My voice hardened, turning cold and flat. "We are not calling the authorities. We are taking the board." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What is the play?" I pushed the forged document across the desk, back toward my chief financial officer. "Contact the Chicago lender this afternoon. Shadow banks do not want to manage Oregon real estate. They want liquid capital. They will gladly sell distressed debt if someone offers them a clean exit. We are going to buy the loan." Marcus stopped, tapping his fingers. "You want to pay off his debt?" "I am not paying it off," I corrected. "I am acquiring it. But Artemis Logistics cannot be the name on the paper. We are a publicly traded entity now. Our board of directors will not authorize the purchase of a toxic mezzanine loan tied to a failing delivery app." "Set up a shell corporation," David suggested, catching my rhythm. "A blind limited liability company registered in Delaware." "Exactly," I said. "Name it Aegis Holdings. Draft the articles of incorporation today and fund it through my private trust. Aegis Holdings will purchase the entire debt portfolio from the Chicago lender. We buy the loan, the late fees, the collateral rights, and the original forged signature document. Everything transfers to Aegis." David began typing notes on his tablet. "The Chicago firm will ask for a premium to expedite the transfer." "Pay it," I instructed. "I want Aegis Holdings to hold the exclusive lien on the Lake Oswego house by tomorrow morning. I want to own the paper that dictates my father's freedom." Marcus smiled a thin, sharp expression of professional respect. "Tyler will receive a notification that his debt has been sold to a new entity. He will think he bought himself some time. He will think a new corporate landlord means a new negotiation period. Let him think he has room to breathe," I said. My phone vibrated on the desk again. Another text message illuminated the screen. It was Brenda. "Sweetheart, we are in downtown Portland doing some shopping. We would love to grab a quick coffee with our favorite CEO. Meet us at the Roastery on Pearl Street in an hour. Please, we just want to see your face." I stared at the text. They were mobilizing. The desperation was pushing them out of their suburban enclave and into my territory. They thought they could sit across from me at a cafe, play the loving parents, and manipulate a few $1 million out of my accounts to cover their criminal son. They believed I was still the quiet girl, eating a grocery store cupcake, willing to accept crumbs of affection in exchange for my loyalty. I picked up my suit jacket from the back of my chair. "Where are you going?" Marcus asked. I slipped my arms into the tailored emerald sleeves and adjusted the cuffs. "I am going to get coffee with my parents. I need to look them in the eye while they try to steal my money. Get Aegis Holdings registered before I finish my espresso." I walked out of the executive suite, leaving the forged documents on the desk. The trap was set. Now I needed to let them walk right into it. The rain hit the pavement in heavy, rhythmic sheets as I parked my car in the Pearl District. I walked 2 blocks to the roastery. The heavy oak doors swung open, releasing a wave of warm air carrying the scent of dark roasted beans and damp wool. The cafe catered to the upscale tech crowd. High ceilings, exposed brick walls, and low ambient lighting. I spotted them immediately. Brenda and Richard sat in a leather booth near the back corner. They looked entirely out of place among the startup founders and digital artists. My father wore a stiff tan trench coat over a golf shirt. His knuckles rested flat on the wooden table. They looked pale. He kept checking his watch. My mother sat rigid next to him, wearing a cashmere cardigan and her aspen pearls. She held a paper napkin, twisting it between her fingers until the edges tore. Fear is a physical weight. It drags down the shoulders and pulls the corners of the mouth. They carried the weight of $1 million foreclosure and a looming federal indictment. But when they saw me approach, the fear vanished behind a carefully constructed mask of parental pride. Brenda stood up, stretching her arms wide. Madison, sweetheart. I stepped into the embrace, enduring the brief artificial warmth. She smelled like expensive floral perfume and stale anxiety. Richard stood next, offering a stiff, awkward pat on my upper arm. He forced a wide smile that failed to reach his eyes. "We saw the news," Richard said. His voice sounded too loud for the quiet cafe. "The stock price looks strong. Always knew you had a solid work ethic. Takes after her old man, right, Brenda?" My mother nodded enthusiastically. "We are just bursting with pride. I ordered your favorite coffee." She gestured to a tall ceramic mug resting on my side of the table. A caramel macchiato topped with a thick mound of whipped cream and a heavy drizzle of syrup. I looked at the drink. I stopped consuming sugar-filled coffee during my sophomore year of college. I drank black espresso. It was a minor detail, but it perfectly encapsulated the chasm between us. They did not know the woman standing in front of them. They only knew the outdated projection they had created in their heads. I sat down on the leather bench. I pushed the macchiato 2 inches to the left. "Thank you," I said. My voice remained perfectly neutral. The pleasantries lasted barely 4 minutes. Richard talked about the weather. Brenda asked a generic question about my office location. I offered short, precise answers. I watched their micro-expressions. The way Richard cleared his throat. The way Brenda kept glancing at my designer suit. They were calculating my net worth in real time, trying to figure out how much they could extract. Then the pivot happened. The casual transition from proud parents to desperate con artists. Richard leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He lowered his voice, adopting the serious tone he used when discussing high-level corporate strategy. "Listen, Madison, the real reason we wanted to sit down today, it is about family, about your brother." I kept my hands folded in my lap. "How is Tyler?" "He is doing incredibly well." Brenda chimed in, too fast, her tone pitched up, nervous and eager. "His company is growing so fast. He is a real visionary. But you know how the tech world works, sweetheart. Sometimes success moves faster than the banks can process." "He is transitioning some key assets," Richard added, smoothing his tie. "It is a complex corporate restructuring, very high-level stuff, but the lawyers are holding up the liquid capital. Tyler just has a temporary cash flow issue. He needs a little seed money to bridge the gap until his massive buyout closes next month." I sat perfectly still. Transitioning assets, temporary cash flow issue, seed money. The audacity of their lies felt almost physical. They sat across from me, peddling a fabricated story about a corporate buyout, while a shadow lender in Chicago held the forged deed to their home. They did not mention the foreclosure notice. They did not mention the federal wire fraud. They treated me like a naive, gullible bank machine. They assumed the quiet, invisible daughter would write a check to fix the golden child without ever demanding to see the ledger. "How much seed money does he need?" I asked. $2 million, Richard said. He said it quickly, trying to make the sum sound trivial. "It is just a short-term family loan, Madison, a bridge. You will get it back with interest the second his deal clears." The words seed money echoed in my head, triggering a visceral memory. A decade vanished. I was 20 years old again, standing in the pristine kitchen of their Lake Oswego house. It was the final week of my junior year of college. My secondhand laptop had crashed the night before, a permanent black screen taking all my study guides and project files with it. I needed $500 to replace the motherboard before my exams. I found my father standing by the marble island reviewing his quarterly stock portfolio. I explained the situation. I begged for a small loan, offering to work extra shifts at the campus library to pay him back. Richard did not even look up from his financial papers. He sipped his coffee and shook his head. "I am sorry, Madison, but I run a tight budget." Richard had said, his voice devoid of any empathy, "You need to learn financial responsibility. We only invest in guaranteed returns." I stood there, holding my dead computer, feeling the heat of humiliation burn my cheeks. A horn honked in the driveway. Tyler walked through the front door, spinning a silver set of keys around his index finger. Richard had just purchased him a brand new luxury sedan for achieving a mediocre grade in a basic business ethics class. "A reliable car is a guaranteed return," Richard had said, clapping my brother on the shoulder. The memory faded back into the ambient noise of the Portland roastery. I looked at the man sitting across from me. His hair looked thinner now. His posture sagged under the invisible weight of his impending ruin. The father who refused me $500 for an education now sat in a cafe begging for $2 million to cover a felony. They deemed me a bad investment my entire life. Now they needed my capital to save them from a prison sentence. My instinct screamed at me to slide the forged signature document across the table, to watch the color drain from their faces as they realized I knew every dirty detail of their fraudulent existence. But exposing the truth now would give them time to prepare, time to run, time to craft a new lie. I employed calculated restraint. I kept my face smooth and impassive. I offered them nothing to feed on. No anger, no judgment, no easy compliance. $2 million is a significant figure, I said softly. My voice betrayed no emotion. Richard nodded eagerly, his eyes wide with desperate hope. "It is just a bridge loan, Madison. Keep the wealth in the family. You take care of us, and we take care of you." I let a thin, polite curve touch the corners of my mouth. "I understand. I think we should celebrate family properly." I reached into the inner pocket of my emerald suit jacket. I pulled out 2 thick cardstock envelopes embossed with gold foil. I slid them across the wooden table until they rested in front of Brenda. "My company is hosting our official initial public offering gala this Saturday night," I said, "downtown Portland at the Glass Pavilion. It is a closed event, investors and board members only, but I want both of you there." Brenda looked at the expensive invitations and then back at my face. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "But what about Tyler's seed money, Madison? Time is very sensitive." I kept the polite smile frozen in place. "Bring Tyler to the party. I have a major surprise planned for the family. We can finalize all the financial details at the gala." Brenda and Richard exchanged a rapid, loaded glance. I watched the tension melt out of their shoulders. Relief washed over their faces like a physical wave. They thought they had won. They believed the compliance scapegoat had caved to their parental authority. Richard picked up the gold-embossed envelopes and slipped them into his coat pocket with a smug, satisfied nod. "We will be there, sweetheart," Brenda said. She reached across the table and patted the back of my hand. "You are a good sister, Madison. We always knew you would do the right thing." They stood up from the leather booth. Richard buttoned his coat, offering a confident wave to the barista, as if he owned the establishment. They walked out of the heavy oak doors and stepped into the Oregon rain. Their steps looked lighter, their posture straightened. They believed they had successfully conned me out of $2 million. I sat alone at the table listening to the rain hit the window. I looked at the untouched caramel macchiato. They thought they were walking into a celebration. They had no idea they had just accepted a formal invitation to their own execution. And while they drove back to their mortgaged house believing their problems were solved, my chief financial officer was finalizing the paperwork for Aegis Holdings. The board was set. The trap was armed. Now, I just had to wait for the golden child to make his phone call. I returned to my executive suite at Artemis headquarters with the smell of dark roasted coffee and cheap lies still clinging to my coat. The rain outside continued to wash the Portland skyline in shades of gray, but inside my office, the atmosphere felt electric. The trap required meticulous assembly. I shed my damp outerwear and took my seat at the head of the long mahogany table. David and Marcus waited for me. Between them sat a fresh stack of legal documents printed on heavy cardstock. "The Chicago lender accepted our premium offer," Marcus said. His voice carried the crisp satisfaction of a completed transaction. "The wire transfer cleared 10 minutes ago. Aegis Holdings is now the sole proprietor of the mezzanine debt. We own the bridge loan. We own the collateral rights to the Lake Oswego house." David slid the original forged signature document across the table. "And we possess the physical evidence of federal wire fraud." I looked at the blue ink loops of my father's stolen name. The power dynamic of my entire existence had just shifted on its axis. For 30 years, I lived under the heavy shadow of my parents' conditional love. I navigated their dismissals and survived their financial rejections. Now, their future rested inside a thin manila folder on my desk. "Draft the acquisition term sheet," I instructed. My tone remained flat and unyielding. "We're going to offer Tyler a buyout through Aegis Holdings." David uncapped his pen. "What are the terms?" "The mathematics of accountability are very simple," I said. "Aegis Holdings will absorb Syncroot in its entirety. We take the back-end algorithms, the intellectual property, and the patents. The purchase price will equal the exact outstanding balance of the fraudulent bridge loan, not 1 penny more." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You are initiating a total asset strip." "Yes," I replied. "The funds will route directly from Aegis to clear the debt. We will release the lien on the Lake Oswego house, saving Richard from a federal indictment and a foreclosure. But Tyler receives nothing. 0 liquid capital, 0 retained equity, 0 board seats. He walks away with empty pockets and a dead company." David took rapid notes. "It is a brutal contract. If he has any pride left, he will fight it." "He has no pride," I corrected. "He only has fear. He will sign it because the alternative is watching his father go to prison for a forgery he committed. Set the termination clauses. I want his executive authority revoked the second his pen leaves the paper." Before David could finish writing the specific legal jargon, a soft chime echoed through the room. The dedicated secure phone line sitting in the center of the conference table lit up. Marcus had routed the Chicago lender's contact numbers directly to our legal department under the Aegis Holdings umbrella. "Tyler received the notification of the debt transfer," Marcus whispered. He pushed a button on the console, activating the speakerphone. The room fell dead silent. I folded my hands in my lap and listened. "Hello," a voice crackled through the speaker. It was Tyler. The arrogance he carried at family dinners, the smug superiority he displayed when mocking my software, the loud confidence he used to command a room, it was all gone. His voice shook. He sounded small. He sounded like a terrified boy cornered in a dark alley. "This is Aegis Legal Counsel," David answered. His tone was deep, smooth, and terrifyingly professional. "Please," Tyler gasped. A sharp hitch of breath betrayed the panic seizing his lungs. "Please, you have to give me an extension. I received the notice that you bought my debt profile from the Chicago group. I just need 30 days. I can secure new funding. I can pay the interest penalties." Mr. James David said, reading from the script we prepared. "Aegis Holdings does not grant extensions on distressed accounts. Your loan is in profound default. We are initiating the foreclosure process on the Lake Oswego collateral tomorrow morning." A ragged sob erupted from the speaker. It was a jarring, visceral sound. The golden child, the tech visionary my mother worshipped, was weeping on a corporate conference call. "You cannot take the house," Tyler cried. The words tumbled out of his mouth in a frantic rush. "My father will kill me." The signature on the final draw, it was not authorized. "If the courts look at the deed, my life is over. I am bankrupt. I have nothing left. Please, I will do anything. Do not file the lien." I sat in my leather chair, staring at the speakerphone. The dramatic irony tasted sharp and metallic in my mouth. Tyler believed he was begging a faceless, ruthless corporation for mercy. He was spilling his darkest secrets and admitting to a federal felony. He had no idea his invisible, forgotten sister sat 3 feet away from the microphone, absorbing every pathetic tear. Aegis Holdings is an acquisition firm, David said, cutting through the sobbing with surgical precision. We do not want your real estate, Mr. James. We want your intellectual property. We are prepared to offer a total buyout of Syncroot. The purchase will clear your debt profile and extinguish the collateral lien. You will not face foreclosure. Tyler let out a long, shuddering exhale. Oh my God. Yes, whatever the terms are, I accept. We will draft the documents, David said. We require an in-person signature from the acting chief executive officer. Tell me where to be. Tyler rushed to say, I will fly anywhere. We will contact you with the location by the end of the business day, David replied, and terminated the call. The dial tone hummed through the office. Marcus turned off the speaker. No one spoke for a long moment. We had just listened to a man surrender his entire identity. Then my personal cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. A text message from Tyler. I opened the thread. The whiplash between the phone call and the text message felt severe. 10 minutes ago, he was crying and confessing to fraud. Now his digital words dripped with manufactured bravado. Heard you had a cute little initial public offering today, Mads, Tyler wrote. Enjoy the 15 minutes of fame. I am too busy closing a real mega deal to make it to your company party this weekend. The big leagues are calling. Try not to miss me at the gala. I read the text twice. The sheer pathology of his behavior fascinated me. He was standing in the wreckage of his own life, facing prison and bankruptcy, yet he still possessed the compulsive need to tear me down. He needed to project dominance over me to survive his own failure. I looked up at David. Set the physical meeting. David nodded. Where do you want him to sign the contract? Call him back, I instructed. Tell him the anonymous chief executive officer of Aegis Holdings requires the documents signed this Saturday night. Tell him the Aegis executive is a major stakeholder in Artemis Logistics and will be attending our public offering gala. Marcus smiled, catching the design of the trap. He will think he is sneaking into your party to sign a $1 billion deal with your superiors. Exactly, I said. Tell him to present himself to the VIP suite overlooking the main floor. The security team will expect him. David stepped out of the room to make the call. I watched the rain slide down the glass of my window. Tyler would put on a tailored suit. He would walk past my billboard. He would enter my building believing he had won the ultimate victory. He would take the bait without a second thought. 5 minutes later, the heavy office door opened again. It was not David. It was Elias, my head of corporate security. A former intelligence officer, Elias rarely showed emotion, but his jaw was set in a hard, grim line. He held a printed spreadsheet. Ms. James, Elias said, stepping into the room. We received the preliminary guest list for the VIP mezzanine this Saturday. Your brother responded to the legal summons. He confirmed his attendance. Excellent, I said. Elias did not smile. He placed the spreadsheet on the table. You need to read this. He is not coming alone. I picked up the paper. Tyler had submitted a security clearance request for 3 additional guests to join him in the private suite. I read the names. They were the last 3 remaining junior investors tied to his dying company, the men he was desperately trying to string along. The stakes in the room instantly fractured and multiplied. Tyler was not just coming to sign a secret deal in the dark. His delusion ran so deep, he invited an audience. He wanted his investors to watch him close a buyout in a glass room overlooking my party. He intended to use the opulence of my gala as a theatrical backdrop for his fake success. He was bringing spectators to his own slaughter, and my parents would be standing right outside the door. The glow of my laptop screen illuminated the dark walls of my penthouse apartment. It was Thursday night, 2 days until the gala. I sat on my velvet sofa reviewing the preliminary draft of the Aegis Holdings acquisition contract. The legal terminology was dense and unforgiving. Every paragraph represented a steel bar in the cage I was building for my brother. My phone vibrated against the glass coffee table. The screen lit up with a new message in the family group chat. I picked it up. Brenda had sent a long, frantic paragraph accompanied by a link to a local news article. "Did you see what happened to the Kensington family?" Brenda wrote. Her digital tone conveyed a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. The federal authorities raided their house this morning. Arthur Kensington was indicted for corporate embezzlement. The news cameras parked right on their front lawn. The entire neighborhood saw him walk out in handcuffs. I would rather die than suffer the indignity of a public trial. Family reputation is everything. We spend our whole lives building our standing in this community, and Arthur threw it away for greed. I read the text 3 times. A slow, cold smile touched the corners of my mouth. The universe rarely hands you the exact psychological blueprint of your enemy, but Brenda had just delivered hers on a silver platter. Lake Oswego was a town fueled by quiet wealth and loud judgments. Social standing dictated your worth. Brenda spent 30 years curating her image for country club luncheons, charity boards, and neighborhood associations. She viewed poverty as a character flaw and public scandal as a terminal disease. Her greatest fear was not losing her husband or failing her children. Her ultimate terror was becoming a cautionary tale for the other wives at the tennis club. She stated she would rather die than face a public trial. She believed family reputation was the only currency that mattered. She had no idea her own husband was weeks away from the exact same fate as Arthur Kensington. This crucial piece of foreshadowing locked my leverage into place. I did not just possess the financial power to ruin them. I held the power to destroy the one thing Brenda valued above human life, her image. I set the phone down and pulled the contract draft back onto my lap. The terms David had written were brutal, but they lacked a permanent failsafe. Tyler was a chronic liar. If I paid off his debt and let him walk away, he would eventually spin a new narrative. He would find a way to claim credit for the bailout. Or worse, he would try to rebuild his fake empire and endanger my parents again. I needed a mechanism that would gag him forever. Friday morning, I stood in the Artemis Logistics conference room with David. The gray Portland sky cast long shadows across the polished table. We needed to revise the term sheet. "The asset strip is clean," David said, pointing to the second page of the document. "Aegis Holdings absorbs the patents, the back-end framework, and the remaining capital. The Chicago lender receives the wire transfer to clear the mezzanine loan. The lien on your parents' home evaporates." Tyler signs the transfer and walks away with 0 equity. "It is not enough," I said. I leaned over the table and tapped the final signature block. He will sign this because he is terrified, but terror fades. When the immediate threat of prison disappears, his ego will return. He will go to the tech press and claim Aegis Holdings forced a hostile takeover. He will try to sabotage Artemis again. We need a dead man switch. David frowned. What kind of switch? "Add a new appendix," I instructed. "Non-negotiable terms of surrender." First, he signs a permanent non-compete clause. He is barred from serving as an executive, a founder, or a board member for any technology firm in the United States for the rest of his natural life. His career in Silicon Valley ends on Saturday night. David began typing rapidly on his tablet. That is a heavy restriction. Courts sometimes throw out indefinite non-competes if the subject lacks a way to earn a living. "He can sell real estate or pour coffee," I replied. My voice held 0 sympathy. "But he will never touch software again." To ensure he never challenges the non-compete in court, we add the second requirement. I paused, letting the weight of the decision settle into the quiet room. "Tyler must draft a full written confession of the wire fraud," I continued. "He must detail exactly how he bypassed the notary protocols and forged our father's signature on the shadow loan. He signs it in front of our corporate witnesses. Aegis Holdings retains the original physical copy." David stopped typing. His eyes widened. "You are turning the contract into a loaded gun." "Yes," I said. "We embed a trigger clause. if Tyler ever speaks to the press about Artemis Logistics, if he ever attempts to contact me, if he ever violates the non-compete agreement, Aegis Legal Counsel is contractually obligated to forward his signed confession directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. David stared at me. The ambient hum of the office ventilation system seemed to amplify in the silence. "It is a brilliant mechanism," David finally said, his tone carrying a trace of awe. "It bypasses civil litigation entirely. He steps out of line and he sends himself to federal prison. You are not just buying his company, Madison. You are buying his silence for the rest of his life." "Draft it," I said. "Print it on the heaviest cardstock we have." Saturday afternoon arrived carrying the electric anticipation of the gala. I stood in the center of my master bedroom preparing for the night that would sever my past from my future. A black garment bag hung from the brass hook on my closet door. I unzipped it slowly. Inside hung a custom-tailored emerald green executive suit. The silk lining felt cool and smooth against my skin as I slipped my arms into the jacket. The cut was sharp, precise, and unapologetic. It was the armor of a woman who no longer asked for permission to exist. As I adjusted the collar in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, a ghost from my childhood drifted into my reflection. I remembered my 12th birthday. It happened to fall on the same weekend as Tyler's Sweet 16. Brenda had rented out an entire indoor laser tag arena for him, complete with a catered buffet and a professional photographer. I remembered standing in the hallway of our Lake Oswego home, wearing a faded beige corduroy sweater I had dug out of a thrift store bin. The sleeves were too short. The fabric smelled faintly of dust and old mothballs. I had asked Brenda for a new dress to wear to the party. She barely glanced at me as she adjusted Tyler's perfectly styled hair. "The party budget is very tight this month." "Madison," she had said, her tone dripping with passive irritation, "nobody is going to be looking at you anyway. Just wear what you have and try to stay out of the photos." Nobody is going to be looking at you. The phrase had echoed in my head for nearly 2 decades. It dictated my posture. It taught me to shrink, to lower my voice, and to hide in the shadows so the golden child could absorb the light. I looked at the woman in the mirror. The emerald suit fit flawlessly. The fabric caught the ambient light, projecting authority and quiet danger. I was no longer the girl in the faded corduroy. I was the architect of their impending reality. Everyone was going to look at me tonight. I walked over to my bedside table. A pristine manila folder rested on the mahogany surface. It contained the finalized Aegis Holdings term sheet, the permanent non-compete, and the blank confession page awaiting Tyler's signature. I ran my fingertips across the smooth edge of the heavy paper. The physical weight of the trap felt incredibly satisfying. I picked it up and secured it inside my leather briefcase. My phone chimed with an incoming security alert. Elias, my head of intelligence, was monitoring the perimeter of the downtown glass pavilion. "Ms. James," Elias said through the secure line, "we have a developing situation at the venue doors." I grabbed my briefcase and headed for the penthouse elevator. "What is the status, Elias?" "Your parents arrived 30 minutes early," Elias reported. "They are currently arguing with the valet staff. And your brother just pulled up to the rear entrance. His 3 junior investors are with him, but Tyler hired a freelance photographer. He is demanding the security detail let his photographer into the lobby to document his arrival for a press release." I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the private garage. Tyler was attempting to turn his secret surrender into a media spectacle. He still believed he was the conquering hero walking into a room full of conquered peasants. He thought he could control the narrative before the ink even dried. "Hold the photographer at the curb," I instructed. "Let Tyler and his investors into the lobby. Let my parents wander the main floor. Do not guide anyone to the VIP suite yet." "Understood," Elias said. "I want them to see the environment," I said, the elevator descending into the concrete belly of the building. "I want them to stand in the center of my empire and realize they do not hold a single ounce of power. I am 10 minutes away." The doors opened to my waiting town car. The pieces were on the board. The forgotten daughter was pulling up to the venue, and the masterclass in accountability was about to begin. The air in downtown Portland cracked with an electric energy rarely seen outside of Silicon Valley or Wall Street. Floodlights cut through the Oregon drizzle, casting sweeping beams against the facade of the glass pavilion. A line of black luxury vehicles stretched around the block. Valets rushed back and forth under the heavy canvas awnings. The Artemis Logistics Public Offering Gala had become the undisputed epicenter of power in the city. Brenda and Richard rode in the back of a rented Lincoln Town Car. They dressed for a polite suburban charity dinner. Richard wore his best navy suit, the one he saved for church and country club functions. Brenda wore her signature cashmere wrap and the aspen pearls. They sat in the plush leather seats, sharing a quiet, smug anticipation. They believed they were arriving at a modest corporate party to humor their invisible daughter. They thought they would shake a few hands, drink cheap wine, and finalize the extraction of $2 million to bail out Tyler. The town car pulled up to the curb. A valet opened the heavy rear door. Richard stepped out first, buttoning his jacket with a practiced air of practiced importance. He reached back and offered his hand to Brenda. She stepped onto the wet pavement and turned to face the venue. She froze. Her hand tightened around Richard's fingers with a sudden bruising force. Richard looked up, following her gaze. His jaw dropped. The glass pavilion did not look like a rented hall for a mid-level tech startup. It looked like a fortress of modern wealth. But the architecture was not what stopped them in their tracks. It was the projection. A digital billboard covered the entire eastern wall of the building. It stretched 5 stories high, illuminating the dark street with a blinding, crisp white light. The image displayed on the screen was a high-resolution portrait of me, wearing the emerald executive suit, looking down at the street with absolute, uncompromising authority. Below my face, massive black letters spelled out the reality they had spent a decade ignoring. Madison James, founder and chief executive officer, Artemis Logistics. New York Stock Exchange, initial public offering. The sheer, colossal scale of the projection shattered their carefully constructed narrative in an instant. This was not a cute little work event. This was an empire, and their forgotten daughter sat on the throne. They stood on the sidewalk while tech journalists, state politicians, and venture capitalists brushed past them, flashing heavy metal credentials at the security perimeter. Nobody noticed Brenda and Richard. They were microscopic elements caught in the gravitational pull of my success. Richard swallowed hard, tearing his eyes away from the 5-story billboard. "Come on, Brenda," he muttered, his voice lacking its usual commanding boom. "Let us get inside and find Madison. We need to lock down that seed money tonight." They approached the main entrance. A towering security guard in a dark suit checked their identification against a digital tablet. They were waved through the metal detectors and stepped onto the main floor of the gala. The interior of the glass pavilion overwhelmed the senses. Bass-heavy ambient music pulsed through the floorboards. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated with trays of vintage champagne and caviar. The room was packed with the elite architects of the American tech industry. Billionaires wearing understated sneakers stood in circles discussing global supply chain algorithms. Camera flashes popped near the media staging area. Brenda gripped Richard's arm. She smiled her wide social smile, scanning the crowd, expecting people to recognize the parents of the guest of honor. She waited for a greeting. She waited for a host to escort them to a reserved table. Nothing happened. They stood near the coat check, entirely ignored. They were not the revered matriarch and patriarch of a tech dynasty. They were ghosts haunting a machine they did not understand. The profound irrelevance hit Brenda like a physical blow. For 30 years, she dictated the social hierarchy of Lake Oswego. Here, she possessed zero capital. "Where is our table?" Brenda hissed, leaning close to Richard's ear. "We are the parents of the founder. We should have a designated seating area." Richard adjusted his tie, his face flushing a dull red. "I do not see her. Let us check the upper levels." They navigated through the dense crowd of power brokers, avoiding eye contact with industry titans they could not hope to recognize. They reached the base of a sweeping glass staircase that led to the floating VIP mezzanine. A thick velvet rope blocked the stairs. Two security operatives from Elias Detail stood shoulder to shoulder, holding digital scanners. Richard approached the row, projecting the false confidence he used to intimidate car salesmen. "Excuse me," he said, puffing out his chest. "We are Madison James' parents. We need to go up to the private suite." The security guard, a man with a scarred jaw and dead eyes, did not even blink. He checked his tablet. "I am sorry, sir. The VIP mezzanine is a restricted area tonight." Brenda stepped forward, her voice rising an octave. "You do not understand. We are the family of the chief executive officer, and our son, Tyler James, is arriving any minute. He is a very important tech founder. He has a private meeting scheduled upstairs. Tyler James. Look for his name." The guard tapped the screen. "Tyler James is on the clearance list for a specific scheduled meeting. You are not." "But we are his parents," Brenda argued, the thin veneer of her social grace beginning to crack. "We need to be up there with him. Madison told us to come here to finalize a family transaction." "Sir, ma'am," the guard said, his tone flat and uncompromising. "The VIP suite is reserved strictly for the chief executive officer's private corporate business. Family members do not hold clearance for the upper level without explicit authorization from Ms. James herself. You are welcome to enjoy the hospitality on the main floor. Please step away from the rope." Richard stared at the guard. He opened his mouth to deliver a blistering reprimand, but the cold, empty stare of the security operative shut him down. Richard lacked the courage to cause a scene in a room full of billionaires. He grabbed Brenda's elbow and pulled her back into the crowd. They retreated to a dark corner near the catering doors. The panic began to set in. The symptoms were visible. Richard's breathing grew shallow. Brenda twisted her pearl necklace so hard the silk thread strained. The reality of the situation rapidly decoded in their minds. They had walked into the pavilion assuming Madison was still the desperate girl craving their approval. They believed they could easily extract $2 million to save the Lake Oswego house and keep Tyler out of federal prison. But the 5-story billboard, the vintage champagne, and the impenetrable security perimeter revealed a terrifying truth. Madison did not just possess a lucky break. She commanded an army of lawyers, guards, and capital. They held zero leverage. They could not shame her into submission. They could not guilt her in front of a crowd that worshipped her. They were trapped inside her fortress, operating entirely on her mercy. "What do we do?" Brenda whispered, her voice trembling. "The bank foreclosure happens on Monday, Richard. If Madison does not write that check tonight, we lose the house. We lose everything." Richard ran a shaking hand through his thinning hair. "We find Tyler. Tyler knows how to handle these corporate environments. He said he was closing a mega deal tonight. He will know how to get up to that suite. He will fix this." They clung to the delusion like a life raft in a hurricane. They scoured the chaotic dance floor, searching the sea of faces for the golden child. They needed Tyler to sweep in with his arrogant charm and reestablish the natural order of the family. They needed him to demand access to the VIP suite and force Madison to hand over the cash. High above the frantic, searching parents, I stood in the soundproof glass box of the VIP mezzanine. I watched Brenda and Richard weave through the crowd below, looking small and terrified. I held a glass of sparkling water, my emerald suit catching the low amber light of the suite. The dedicated secure phone in my pocket vibrated. "Elias, Ms. James," Elias said, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Target has breached the perimeter. Your brother just walked through the front doors." "Let him pass," I said. My eyes remained fixed on my parents, wandering the floor below. "Ensure his investors stay with him. Guide him directly to the stairs." I disconnected the call and set my glass down on the mahogany conference table. The pristine manila folder rested directly in the center. The trap was armed. The golden child was about to walk into the slaughterhouse, and he was bringing an audience to watch him bleed. The heavy glass doors of the pavilion slid open. Tyler stepped out of the Portland rain and into the blinding spectacle of the Artemis Logistics Gala. He wore a dark navy bespoke suit tailored tight to project authority, but the damp sheen on his forehead betrayed the panic vibrating beneath the fabric. The man walking through those doors carried the weight of $1 million federal wire fraud, a bankrupt delivery app, and a terrified family relying on his phantom success. But the Golden Child never let reality interfere with a performance. He flanked himself with two nervous men in their late 20s. These were the junior investors from a minor venture capital syndicate, the last two remaining true believers who still thought Syncroot held value. Tyler had promised them a front row seat to a massive corporate buyout. He needed them there. He needed witnesses to validate his ego. If he was going to surrender his failing company to a faceless corporation, he intended to make it look like a historic victory. He did not look up at the 5-story billboard projecting my face. He did not look at the Artemis branding plastered across the walls. He ignored the undeniable proof of my empire, because acknowledging it meant acknowledging his own profound failure. Tyler operated on a singular track: survive the night, secure the buyout, and maintain the illusion of dominance. He marched straight through the crowd of billionaires and journalists, treating them like extras on a movie set. His junior investors scrambled to keep up, dodging waitstaff carrying trays of champagne. Tyler bypassed the coat check and headed directly for the velvet rope blocking the glass staircase to the VIP mezzanine. He did not pause or ask for permission. He stepped up to the security operative with the scarred jaw and flashed a bright, artificial smile. "Tyler James," he announced, his voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "I have a private scheduled meeting in the executive suite upstairs with the representatives from Aegis Holdings. We are executing a major acquisition tonight. These two gentlemen are my associates." The security guard looked at his tablet. He did not ask Tyler to step aside. He did not challenge the arrogant tone. Elias had briefed the entire detail perfectly. The trap required a frictionless entry. "Yes, Mr. James," the guard said, unclipping the velvet rope and stepping back. "Aegis Legal Counsel is waiting for you in the boardroom. Please proceed up the stairs." Tyler turned back to his investors, shooting them a smug, victorious look. "Did I not tell you?" he boasted, puffing his chest out. "VIP treatment all the way. Aegis Holdings knows how to handle top-tier talent." They ascended the glass steps, leaving the chaotic noise of the main floor behind. At the top of the landing, heavy, soundproof double doors led into the floating VIP suite. The room was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. Dark wood paneling, recessed amber lighting, and a massive, polished mahogany conference table surrounded by black leather chairs. A wall of reinforced glass offered a panoramic view of the entire gala below, while blocking all sound from entering or exiting the room. Tyler walked in and immediately claimed the chair at the far end of the table. He moved with manic, frantic energy. He was seconds away from signing a document that would wipe away his debt and erase his federal crime. He felt the heavy hand of the Chicago shadow lender lifting off his neck. He stood up and walked over to the glass wall, looking down at the hundreds of guests on the main floor. The junior investors joined him, visibly impressed by the sheer opulence of the venue. "This is incredible," one of the investors murmured, tapping the glass. "Aegis Holdings threw a hell of a party." Tyler scoffed, running a hand through his damp hair. "Aegis did not throw this party. My little sister threw it. She took some boring logistics software public today. Aegis is just a major investor in her firm. They are using her venue as a convenient meeting spot to close my deal." The delusion held firm. Faced with a room full of my branding, my wealth, and my success, Tyler simply rewrote the narrative to center himself. I was merely the host, providing a pretty backdrop for his historical triumph. He looked down through the glass and spotted me on the main floor. I was standing near the media staging area, shaking hands with the mayor of Portland. He tapped the glass with a rigid finger. "Look at her down there, pressing the flesh with local politicians." He laughed, a short, sharp sound lacking any real humor. "She managed to hire a decent public relations team, I will give her that. But ringing a bell on Wall Street is a temporary high. When I sign this Aegis contract tonight and cash out private, I will make her public offering look like a lemonade stand." Tyler walked back to the conference table and sat down. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke jacket and pulled out a heavy black velvet box. He snapped it open and extracted the custom-engraved Mont Blanc fountain pen Richard had gifted him 6 months prior, the pen he promised to use to sign his first billion-dollar deal, the pen he used to forge our father's name on the shadow loan. He set the heavy instrument on the mahogany table, adjusting it until it lay perfectly parallel to the edge of the wood. He cracked his knuckles and grinned at his investors. The savior was about to arrive. He was ready to accept his crown. The heavy doors of the VIP suite clicked open. David, my general counsel, walked into the room. He wore a charcoal suit and carried a pristine manila folder. He did not smile. He did not offer a handshake. He moved with the cold, clinical efficiency of a surgeon preparing to amputate a limb. David placed the manila folder directly in the center of the table. The heavy cardstock pages sat waiting. "Gentleman David," said his deep voice cutting through the ambient hum of the room, "I am legal counsel for Aegis Holdings. The acquisition term sheet is prepared." Tyler sat up straight, his eyes locking onto the folder. The desperation leaked through his manufactured confidence. "Where do I sign?" "Let us get this done. I have celebratory drinks waiting downtown." David rested his hand on top of the folder. Aegis protocols require the chief executive officer to personally execute acquisitions of this magnitude. The CEO is coming up the stairs now to finalize the signature block. Tyler leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his legs and projecting total relaxation. He adjusted his silk tie and flashed a wide, bright grin. "Send them in. I am ready to close." The stage was perfectly set. The golden child sat in a soundproof glass box, surrounded by the witnesses he brought to validate his ego, waiting to sell his soul to a faceless corporation to avoid a federal prison sentence. He thought he had outsmarted the shadow lender. He thought he had outsmarted his sister. He thought he had won. But as Tyler waited for the anonymous savior to walk through the doors, the minor conflict and the major conflict were about to violently collide. Because down on the main floor, Brenda and Richard had finally spotted their son ascending the glass stairs. They had pushed their way through the crowd of billionaires, ignoring the dirty looks and the spilled champagne, desperate to reach the one person they believed could save them from the impending foreclosure. They reached the velvet rope just as David walked into the suite, and they were not going to take no for an answer. The minor conflict of the parents' panic was accelerating toward the major conflict of the brothers' delusion. The collision point was the mahogany table inside that soundproof room. And I was already walking up the stairs to meet them. The heavy soundproof doors of the VIP suite swung open, but the anonymous chief executive officer of Aegis Holdings did not walk through the frame. Brenda and Richard burst into the boardroom. They had shoved their way past Elias' security detail at the bottom of the stairs, abandoning 3 decades of carefully curated social grace in a single frantic rush. Richard looked pale, his navy suit wrinkled and his tie askew. Brenda looked unhinged. The polite suburban matriarch had vanished, replaced by a terrified woman watching her entire life evaporate. The collision of conflicts happened instantly. Tyler sat at the mahogany table, attempting to project the cool dominance of a tech visionary closing a mega deal. His 2 junior investors watched the sudden intrusion with wide, startled eyes. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" Tyler hissed, dropping his manufactured smile. He shot a frantic look at David, the Aegis legal counsel. "Get out of here. I am in the middle of a massive corporate acquisition." Brenda did not care about the acquisition. She did not care about the junior investors sitting in the leather chairs. The panic had consumed her ability to filter reality. She lunged forward, placing her hands flat on the polished table, leaning directly over the pristine manila folder. "Tyler, we need the seed money right now," Brenda cried. Her voice cracked, loud and sharp, shattering the professional atmosphere of the suite. "The bank called Richard this afternoon. They did not just send a letter, Tyler. They called his cell phone. They are filing the final foreclosure paperwork on Monday morning. They are taking the Lake Oswego house." The words hung in the sterile air. Foreclosure. The junior investors exchanged a rapid, nervous glance. The facade of the golden child began to splinter. Tyler had promised these men he was closing a lucrative buyout to launch a new venture. Now his mother was screaming about a seized house in a glass box overlooking a billionaire gala. "Shut up," Tyler commanded. His voice dropped to a low, venomous growl. The mask cracked, revealing the desperate, entitled child beneath. "Shut your mouth right now, Mom. You are embarrassing me in front of my partners." "I am fixing it. Aegis is buying the debt tonight. Just get out of the room before the CEO walks in." He did not offer comfort. He did not apologize for putting their sanctuary on the chopping block to fund a fake app. Tyler only cared about maintaining the illusion of his own importance in front of two minor venture capitalists. The brutal math of his loyalty was fully exposed. He would gladly watch his parents drown if it meant keeping his tailored suit dry. Richard stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on Brenda's shoulder, trying to pull her back from the table. "Tyler, please," Richard stammered. "We cannot wait for another corporate transition. We need Madison. Where is Madison? She said she had a surprise for the family. We need her to write a check tonight." Before Tyler could snap another insult at his father, the heavy double doors clicked open for a second time. I walked into the boardroom. The emerald executive suit caught the recessed amber lighting. I carried no notes. I carried no phone. I moved with the slow, deliberate cadence of a woman who held every single card in the deck. I stopped a few feet from the mahogany table, observing the scene. Brenda was hyperventilating. Richard looked physically sick. Tyler was gripping the edges of his chair, his knuckles turning white. The junior investors looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. Tyler saw me, and his frustration spiked into outright rage. He stood up, pointing a rigid finger at the door. "Madison, get out," he barked. "I am not playing family games tonight. I am closing a real deal. The CEO of Aegis Holdings is walking through that door any second, and I will not let you ruin this for me with your petty jealousy." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I did not acknowledge the insult. I walked past my mother, ignoring the tears streaming down her face. I walked past my father, ignoring his trembling hands. I moved directly to the head of the long mahogany table. I pulled out the heavy leather chair reserved for the acquiring executive, and I sat down. I folded my hands, resting them inches from the manila folder. I looked up and met my brother's eyes. "I am the executive, Tyler," I said. The tone was flat, quiet, and colder than the Oregon rain outside. "Read the first page." The silence that followed those two sentences was absolute. The ambient noise of the gala below could not penetrate the thick glass. The room felt vacuum-sealed. Tyler stared at me. His brain rejected the information. He looked at David, the legal counsel, seeking a correction. David simply gestured toward the folder. Tyler reached out with a shaking hand and flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. He stared at the first page of the term sheet. The bold black ink spelled out the undeniable reality. Aegis Holdings, LLC, a wholly owned subsidiary of Artemis Logistics, Incorporated. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The arrogant tech founder evaporated. He looked down at the document and realized he had not secured a brilliant secret buyout to save his failing app. He had walked directly into a slaughterhouse, designed, built, and operated by the sister he spent a lifetime dismissing. I owned the shadow debt. I owned the lien on the house. I owned him. The junior investors leaned over to read the header. They understood the implications immediately. Tyler was not a genius securing an exit. He was a bankrupt fraud being swallowed whole by a public corporation. One investor stood up, buttoning his jacket. "We are leaving," he muttered, signaling his partner. They walked out of the suite without a backward glance, abandoning the sinking ship. Tyler dropped the folder back onto the table. "It is a trick," he whispered. The denial was a physical reflex. "You cannot do this. You do not have the capital to buy mezzanine debt." "I went public today, Tyler," I replied. My voice remained perfectly level. "My market cap broke $1 billion 3 hours ago. I could buy your debt, your fake users, and your leased car with the loose change in my corporate accounts. But I am not here to bail you out. Brenda finally processed the dynamic shift in the room. The panic morphed into sudden, desperate hope. She moved toward my chair, her eyes wide. "Madison, you bought the debt." She gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "Oh, thank God. You saved the house. You paid off the bank. We knew you would help the family." I shifted my gaze to my mother. The lack of emotion in my eyes stopped her in her tracks. "I did not pay off the bank, Brenda. I acquired the loan. Aegis Holdings is the new lien holder. I am the entity foreclosing on your house on Monday morning." Richard collapsed into an empty chair, resting his head in his hands. "You cannot take the house, Madison." He groaned, his voice hollow. "It is everything we have. We will be on the street." "I am not taking the house, Richard," I said. I pointed a finger at Tyler. "He gave the house away. He took a $1.2 million shadow loan to fund an app that nobody uses." I paused, letting the next sentence load in the chamber, and then I continued. "He committed federal wire fraud. He bypassed the notary protocols and forged your signature on the final draw documents." The trap was fully exposed. I waited for the shock. I waited for Richard to leap out of his chair and scream at Tyler for stealing his name. I waited for Brenda to realize her golden child was a felon who put her husband in the crosshairs of the federal government. But the shock never came. Instead, Brenda let out a sharp, defensive shriek. "You do not understand the pressure he was under, Madison." I froze. The temperature in the room plummeted. She took a step toward Tyler, shielding him with her body. "We had to let him sign Dad's name," Brenda yelled, tears of misplaced rage streaming down her face. His back was against the wall. The servers were going down. The investors were asking questions. Richard could not pass the credit check for a commercial loan, so we told Tyler to just sign the paper and push the wire transfer through. It was only supposed to be temporary until his mega buyout closed. The plot twist hit me with the force of a physical blow. Tyler did not trick them. He did not sneak into a home office and forge a document while they slept. They knew. My parents willingly colluded in a federal felony. They authorized the forgery. They risked federal prison and the loss of their home to fund the delusion of a son who was currently trying to sell them out. They were not victims of the golden child. They were active accomplices. And yesterday, they sat across from me in a coffee shop, drinking a caramel macchiato, begging me for $2 million in seed money, while knowing a forged federal document was sitting in a shadow bank in Chicago, waiting to explode. The betrayal ran deeper than neglect. It was pure, predatory manipulation. They were willing to drain my accounts to cover up a felony they helped commit. I looked at the three of them: the golden child, the enabler, and the accomplice. They stood in the opulent suite shivering with fear, bound together by lies, fraud, and arrogance. The residual lingering hope that they might somehow learn a lesson or realize my worth finally died. It did not burn out in a fiery explosion of anger. It simply clicked off like a switch. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my cell phone. I placed it on the mahogany table right next to the term sheet and the forged signature document. I tapped the screen and opened the clock application. The rules of engagement had changed. The negotiation was over. It was time for the execution. The revelation hung in the boardroom like toxic exhaust fumes. My parents did not merely ignore my existence. They actively conspired to defraud a shadow lender and then sat across from me sipping coffee, orchestrating a con to drain my startup capital. They intended to use my hard-earned wealth to erase a felony they executed together. The depth of the betrayal bypassed anger. It registered as a profound clinical detachment. The familial bond was dead. Only a business transaction remained. I looked at the three trembling figures standing near the mahogany table. I picked up the manila folder and extracted the heavy cardstock pages. I slid them across the polished wood toward Tyler. My voice dropped to a flat, mechanical register, the emotional frequency of a machine. "Read the terms, Tyler," I instructed. He stared at the documents but refused to touch them. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. Since your reading comprehension seems impaired, I will summarize the math. I continued. Aegis Holdings absorbs your entire operation. We take the algorithms, the user interface, the server infrastructure, and the patents. You surrender all executive authority effective immediately. Your equity drops to zero. You receive no liquid capital, no stock options, no severance package. Tyler clenched his jaw. You are stealing my company. You do not own a company, Tyler. You own a digital graveyard and a federal indictment. I am buying the dirt. I flipped to the second page of the contract. There are 2 additional riders, I stated. First, you will sign a permanent non-compete agreement. You are barred from holding an executive position, serving on a board, or founding any technology enterprise in the United States for the rest of your natural life. Your career in Silicon Valley ends tonight. Brenda gasped, clutching her pearls. Madison, you cannot banish your brother from the industry. Software is his passion. His passion is fraud, Brenda, I corrected without looking at her. My eyes remained locked on Tyler. The second rider is an addendum. You will draft a full, handwritten confession detailing exactly how you executed the wire fraud. You will describe the forged signatures, the falsified notary stamps, and the specific routing numbers used to secure the Chicago loan. Richard wiped sweat from his forehead. Why does he need to confess? If Aegis buys the debt, the lender goes away. The problem is solved. The problem is, managed Richard for clarified. The confession acts as an insurance policy. Aegis retains the physical document. If Tyler ever speaks to the tech press about Artemis Logistics, if he ever attempts to contact me, or if he violates the non-compete parameters, my legal counsel forwards the confession directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It is a dead man's switch. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair. Those are the conditions. In exchange, Artemis Logistics transfers $1.2 million to the Chicago Group. We extinguish the mezzanine loan. We dissolve the real estate lien. The Lake Oswego house remains in your possession, and Richard avoids a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. The brutal calculus of the offer sat on the table. Tyler looked at the pen resting near the folder, the custom Mont Blanc instrument his father had given him. He looked at me, sitting in the seat of power, wearing the emerald suit. His ego flared, refusing to process the surrender. No, Tyler spat. The word carried the petulant venom of a spoiled child denied a toy. I am not signing that paper. I am not letting you take my life work for pennies, just so you can humiliate me. Your life work is a criminal enterprise, I noted. I do not care, Tyler shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. You just want to break me because you spent your whole life rotting in the background. You want me to bow down to you. I will not do it. I will file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy on Monday. I will dissolve the corporate entity myself. I will walk away and let the company die before I hand the keys to you. Tyler thought he was dealing the ultimate blow. He believed pulling the pin on his own grenade would scare me into renegotiating. He failed to realize I did not care if he exploded. The shrapnel would only hit his enablers. I picked up my cell phone from the desk. I opened the clock application. I tapped the screen and set a countdown. 5 minutes. I pressed start. The digital numbers began to fall. 4 minutes and 59 seconds. What are you doing? Tyler demanded. I am establishing a boundary, I replied, setting the phone face up on the mahogany surface next to the contract. The screen glowed bright. You have 5 minutes to sign those papers, Tyler. If this timer hits 0, the acquisition offer expires. Aegis Holdings walks away. Brenda let out a sharp, terrified whimper. Madison, please stop this. You are scaring your father. I kept my gaze fixed on the ticking numbers. 4 minutes and 40 seconds. If the timer hits 0, I continued, the shadow lender initiates the foreclosure protocol on Monday morning. The county sheriff will evict you from the Lake Oswego property, and my general counsel will immediately forward the forged signature photocopies to the federal prosecutor down the street. The dynamic in the room fractured and reassembled. I removed myself from the emotional equation entirely. I was no longer a participant in their toxic family drama. I was merely the Grim Reaper holding a stopwatch. The burden of survival shifted. 4 minutes and 20 seconds, I announced. Richard stared at the glowing digits on the phone screen. His entire identity hinged on financial stability and social respectability. He had built his world around the illusion of suburban perfection. Now the son he worshipped stood ready to burn that world to the ground, just to protect a fragile ego. Tyler signed the paper, Richard urged, his voice thin and raspy. Tyler wheeled around, glaring at his father. Are you kidding me? She wants to ban me from the industry, Dad. She wants me to write a confession. If I sign that document, my career is over. If you do not sign it, my life is over, Richard fired back. The veneer of the supportive patriarch peeled away, exposing the raw panic beneath. I cannot go to federal lockup, Tyler. I am 62 years old. I will not survive a public trial. The country club, the neighbors, everyone will know. We will lose the house. Let them take the house, Tyler sneered, crossing his arms. It is just property. You can downsize, rent an apartment. I need to protect my brand. If I surrender to her, I look weak in the tech community. The words hit Brenda like physical blows. The golden child, the brilliant visionary she had nurtured and protected, was actively choosing his vanity over her survival. She had spent decades ignoring my birthdays, canceling my achievements, and pouring every ounce of her maternal devotion into Tyler. She shielded him from consequences. She funded his expensive habits. She even colluded in a felony to protect his startup. Now facing ruin, she expected him to return the loyalty. She expected the savior to save them. Instead, Tyler treated them as disposable assets. 3 minutes and 30 seconds, I read aloud. The mechanical voice echoed in the quiet suite. Tyler, you have to do this, Brenda pleaded. She reached out, grabbing his tailored sleeve. We did everything for you. We gave you the seed money. We let you use Dad's name for the bridge loan because you promised us it was safe. You promised us you had a buyout coming. I did have a buyout coming, Tyler shouted, ripping his arm away from her grasp, until she sabotaged it. He pointed a shaking finger at me. I did not bother correcting his delusion. The venture capital rejection dossier proved my innocence, but facts do not penetrate a narcissistic breakdown. 2 minutes and 50 seconds. The standoff locked the room in an agonizing stasis. On one side, the aging parents, terrified of poverty and prison. On the other side, the spoiled son, refusing to absorb a single consequence for his actions. The conflict required a sacrifice, and nobody wanted to bleed. I watched the spectacle unfold with cold fascination. This was the ultimate audit of the James family dynamic. For 30 years, the ledger always balanced against me. I carried the deficits. I absorbed the losses. I took the blame. Tyler reaped the dividends. Now the bill was due. The ledger demanded payment, and Tyler lacked the emotional currency to settle the account. 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Richard stepped closer to the table. His hands shook so hard he had to grip the back of a leather chair to steady himself. Tyler, he rasped, I paid for your college. I bought your cars. I funded your first 3 business ventures. I never asked you for a single return on investment. I am asking you now. Pick up the pen. Tyler shook his head, staring out the glass wall at the gala below. He watched the billionaires and the journalists mingling on the floor. He watched the world he desperately wanted to rule. I cannot do it, Dad. She wants to own me. 1 minute and 45 seconds. The countdown acted as a pressure cooker. The air grew thinner. Every second stripped away another layer of polite fiction. Brenda looked at the glowing numbers and then at the son who was sentencing her to homelessness. The realization broke her. The mother who prized dignity and social standing above all else felt the terror overwhelm her pride. She moved around the edge of the mahogany table, her eyes wide and frantic. She positioned herself directly in front of Tyler, blocking his view of the party below. She looked up at his face, searching for any trace of the boy she had spoiled. She found only a hollow, frightened man. 1 minute and 20 seconds. I sat perfectly still. The trap had closed. The parameters were locked. Brenda and Richard had no leverage over me. They could not command me to write a check. They could not shame me into submission. Their only path to survival ran directly through the ego of the golden child. 60 seconds remaining, I said. My voice sliced through the tension like a scalpel. The final minute commenced. The confrontation was shifting from a legal negotiation into a primal battle for survival. The parents who threw me away now had to beg their favorite creation to spare their lives. 59 seconds. The digital numbers on my phone screen clicked backward. The red digits burned bright against the dark wood of the mahogany table. Tyler turned away from the glass wall, pacing the length of the boardroom. He ran both hands through his damp hair, wrecking the expensive styling. He looked at the heavy cardstock pages sitting inside the manila folder. He looked at the Mont Blanc fountain pen resting beside it. "You do not need to do this," Madison Tyler yelled. His voice bounced off the soundproof glass, returning to him hollow and harsh. "You have the money. I saw the ticker tape this morning. You are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. 1.2 million is a rounding error to you. Just pay off the shadow lender. Consider it a gift. A family gift." I picked up my crystal flute and took a slow, deliberate sip of sparkling water. The carbonation popped against my tongue. I set the glass down, ensuring the base rested silently on a leather coaster. I did not speak. I did not need to speak. The timer was doing the talking for me. 45 seconds. Tyler rounded on our father. "Dad, tell her to stop this. Tell her to write the check. She has to listen to you. You are the head of the family." Richard stood frozen near the edge of the table. The man who spent 30 years dictating financial policy in our household looked like a hollowed-out shell. His authority was gone. His leverage was gone. He looked at his son and realized the terrifying truth. The boy he molded, the visionary he funded, the legacy he protected, was perfectly willing to feed him to the federal justice system to avoid bruising a fragile ego. "Tyler, please," Richard begged. His voice cracked, dropping to a pathetic rasp. "She is not going to write a check. You forged my name, Tyler. You committed a crime. If you do not sign that contract, the Federal Bureau of Investigation will be knocking on our front door on Monday morning. I will die in prison. You have to sign it." "I will not sign a confession," Tyler screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He pointed a shaking finger at Richard. "You are a coward. You always have been. You hid in your safe little suburban life, hoarding your boring mutual funds. I took risks. I built a brand. I am a tech founder. If you had just co-signed a legitimate commercial loan for me in the first place, I would never have needed to use the Chicago lender. This is your fault, Dad. You forced me to forge the signature." The audacity of the accusation sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. Tyler was actively rewriting reality, shifting the blame for a federal felony onto the father who was about to take the fall for it. He possessed zero accountability. He viewed his parents entirely as instruments designed to serve his ambition. If the instruments broke, he discarded them. 30 seconds. The parents watched their golden child in dawning horror. The illusion of the perfect family, the curated image Brenda had bled to maintain, shattered into jagged pieces on the boardroom floor. For a decade, they had treated me like a bad investment. They poured all their capital, all their love, all their blind faith into Tyler. And the guaranteed return on that investment was a son who looked at them with unvarnished disgust, willing to trade their freedom for his pride. Brenda could not process the betrayal. The socialite, the country club matriarch, the woman who stated she would rather die than face a public scandal, felt her pristine world collapsing. The timer was a physical manifestation of her impending doom. 20 seconds. Brenda moved. She stumbled forward, her designer heels catching on the thick carpet. She did not reach for my hand. She did not beg me for mercy. She knew the parameters were locked. She reached for the only variable left in the equation. She grabbed the lapels of Tyler's tailored navy suit. Her manicured fingers dug into the expensive wool. "Tyler, look at me," Brenda cried. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was raw, guttural, and stripped of all pretense. It was the sound of an animal caught in a trap. Tyler tried to pull away, but Brenda held on with desperate, surprising strength. "You have to sign it," Brenda sobbed. The tears ruined her careful makeup, leaving dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. "We gave you everything. We bought the cars, we paid for the parties, we funded the seed round. We kept your secret. We lied to your sister. We did it all for you." "Get off me," Tyler hissed, trying to pry her fingers off his jacket. "You are acting pathetic." "I do not care," Brenda shrieked. The pitch of her voice echoed painfully in the confined space. "I do not care how it looks. They are going to take the Lake Oswego house. They are going to put your father in handcuffs. The neighborhood will watch. The Kensington family went through it, and it destroyed them. I will not survive a trial, Tyler. I will not survive the shame." 15 seconds. Tyler shoved her hard. He pushed his mother backward, breaking her grip on his suit. Brenda lost her balance. Her ankles twisted in the high heels. She fell. She did not land gracefully. She hit the floor hard, her knees striking the carpet with a dull thud. The silk of her expensive dress pooled around her legs. The string of aspen pearls around her neck snapped. The small white spheres scattered across the floor, bouncing against the baseboards and rolling under the mahogany table. She did not try to stand up. The matriarch remained on her knees at the feet of the son she had worshipped. She looked up at Tyler, her face twisted in an agony of terror and humiliation. She raised her hands, palms open, pleading. "Please, Tyler," she begged, her voice breaking into a breathless wheeze. "Please save us. Sign the paper. Do not let them take us away. I am begging you." Tyler looked down at his mother kneeling among the broken pearls. He did not reach down to help her up. He did not offer a word of comfort. His expression twisted into a mask of pure revulsion. He looked at her as if she were a piece of garbage sticking to the sole of his shoe. The sight of her weakness offended him. He hated her in that moment, not because she was suffering, but because her suffering demanded something from him. 10 seconds. The digital numbers flashed on the screen, counting down the final moments of the James family dynasty. 9, 8, 7. The tension in the boardroom reached a terminal velocity. The junior investors who had stood frozen near the door during the meltdown finally broke. They recognized the radioactive nature of the scene. They were watching a founder confess to fraud, abuse his father, and shove his mother to the ground. They wanted no part of the fallout. Without a word, the two men quietly pushed open the heavy double doors and slipped out of the suite, abandoning Tyler to his fate. 6, 5, 4. I sat at the head of the table, my hands folded, watching the timer. I offered no extensions. I offered no reprieves. The boundary was absolute. 3, 2. Tyler looked at the door, watching his investors disappear. He looked at Richard, standing gray-faced and shaking. He looked at Brenda, sobbing on her knees. And then he looked at me. He saw the cold, clinical indifference in my eyes. He realized I would let the timer hit 0. He realized I would let the shadow lender seize the house and the federal authorities execute the arrest warrants. I was not bluffing. 1. Tyler lunged for the table. My finger hovered a millimeter above the stop button on my phone screen. The timer read 0001. A single second separated the room from total annihilation. Tyler hit the edge of the mahogany table with his hip, knocking his empty chair backward. He scrambled, grabbing the heavy black barrel of the custom Mont Blanc fountain pen. The golden accents flashed under the amber lighting. The pen Richard had engraved, the pen intended for $1 billion triumph, the pen that forged the felony. Tyler uncapped it with a violent jerk, the motion so frantic the cap clattered across the polished wood and fell to the floor. He leaned over the manila folder. His hand shook with a violent tremor. Tears of pure, undiluted humiliation gathered in his eyes and spilled over his lower lids. They were not tears of regret. They were tears of a narcissist watching his reflection shatter. He pressed the gold nib to the heavy cardstock. The cobalt blue ink bled into the paper. He signed the primary asset strip agreement. A jagged, aggressive scrawl transferring the entirety of Syncroot, the patents, the algorithms, and the remaining capital to Aegis Holdings. For $0. For zero equity. He flipped a page. He signed the permanent non-compete clause, a binding legal shackle barring him from ever holding an executive title, serving on a board, or founding a tech enterprise in the United States for the rest of his natural life. He signed away his career. He signed away his identity. He flipped to the final page, the addendum, the blank sheet requiring a handwritten confession. Tyler hesitated. The pen hovered over the pristine white paper. A drop of cobalt ink fell, staining the sheet. He looked up at me. His eyes were red, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped beneath his skin. He hated me with a purity that transcended sibling rivalry. He hated me because I had forced him to look at his own profound mediocrity. "Write it," I commanded. "The timer is paused, Tyler. It is not deactivated." He lowered his head. He began to write. The scratching of the gold nib against the heavy cardstock filled the silent room. He documented the shadow lender. He detailed the required guarantor documents. He explicitly stated that he bypassed the notary protocols and forged the signature of Richard James without authorization to secure the $1.2 million mezzanine loan. It took him 3 minutes to write the paragraph. When he finished, he signed his full legal name at the bottom. He threw the Mont Blanc pen onto the table. It rolled until it hit the edge of my glass of sparkling water, leaving a thin smear of blue ink on the coaster. Tyler stepped back from the table. He looked physically diminished. The broad shoulders slumped. The tailored suit looked too large for him. He stood in the center of the boardroom, a deposed king, stripped of his crown, his kingdom, and his voice. David, my general counsel, stepped forward. He pulled the manila folder toward his side of the table. He quickly scanned the signatures, verifying the placement and the handwritten text of the confession. He nodded to me a sharp, precise confirmation. The legal mechanics were sound. The trap had successfully closed. I picked up a secondary folder resting near my briefcase. I extracted a single sheet of paper stamped with the official seal of the Chicago Shadow Lender and notarized by my legal team. The physical manifestation of salvation. I stood up from the executive chair. I walked around the mahogany table, bypassing Tyler entirely. I approached Richard. My father looked at me with hollow, sunken eyes. The authoritative patriarch who lectured me on guaranteed returns, who denied me $500 for a laptop, who colluded in a felony to protect his golden boy, now stood waiting for my judgment. He expected a lecture. He expected me to demand an apology. I offered nothing. No anger, no moralizing, no emotional release. I held out the notarized document. Richard reached out with trembling fingers and took the paper. He stared at the bold, black text. The official bank lien release. "The mezzanine debt is cleared, Richard," I said. My voice carried the sterile cadence of an automated operator. Artemis Logistics has settled the account through our subsidiary. The shadow lender has dissolved the collateral hold. The Lake Oswego house is safe. The federal wire fraud exposure is neutralized. You are not going to prison. Richard let out a shuddering breath. A tear leaked from the corner of his eye, tracking down his wrinkled cheek. He clutched the document to his chest as if it were a physical shield. "Madison," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Thank you. I do not know what to say. We were so scared. We are so sorry. We should have never." I held up my hand, cutting off the apology. "Do not," I warned. The command was soft but absolute. "Do not try to rewrite this. You are not sorry you colluded in a felony. You are sorry you got caught. You are sorry you had to beg the daughter you deemed a bad investment to bail you out. Keep the house, Richard. Keep your freedom. But understand the transaction is complete. You owe me no money, and you owe me no explanations. But we are completely done." The finality of the statement hit him. The relief of avoiding prison collided with the realization that he had permanently severed the only authentic connection he had left. He looked down at the paper, unable to meet my eyes. A rustling sound broke the quiet. Brenda was struggling to stand up. She pushed herself off the carpet, her designer dress wrinkled, the broken pearls forgotten on the floor. She leaned heavily against the edge of the conference table, catching her breath. The terror of the foreclosure had evaporated, replaced instantly by a frantic, desperate need to secure her position in my new reality. She looked at me, her eyes wide and wet. The calculation was visible on her face. Her son was ruined. Her husband was broken. But her daughter? The daughter standing in front of her in a custom emerald suit was a billionaire. The socialite instincts overrode the humiliation. She needed to attach herself to the power source. "Madison," she cried, her voice adopting the artificial maternal warmth she used on the voicemails. "Oh, my brilliant girl, you saved us. You really saved our family. I am just so incredibly proud of you. I always knew you were destined for greatness." She took a step toward me, throwing her arms open, attempting to pull me into a tight emotional embrace. She wanted a physical confirmation that the bridge was rebuilt. She wanted to play the proud mother of a tech titan. I did not step back. I simply shifted my weight, smoothly pivoting my shoulder, dropping my stance, and cleanly sidestepping her incoming embrace. The movement was practiced fluid and entirely dismissive. Brenda stumbled forward, grabbing the back of a leather chair to stop herself from falling again. She turned to look at me, shock registering on her tear-stained face. "Madison," she whispered. "Do not ever touch me again, Brenda," I said. The temperature in the boardroom dropped to absolute zero. "You do not get to claim pride in an empire you tried to starve. You do not get to celebrate a daughter you ignored for a decade. And you certainly do not get to use my name at your country club luncheons. You wanted Tyler to be the genius. You bet everything on him. Look at your investment." I gestured toward Tyler. He stood near the glass wall, staring blankly at the floor. A ruined, bankrupt man who had just shoved his mother to the carpet and traded his career for a get-out-of-jail-free card. The brutal mathematics of their choices lay exposed. They were broken, bitter, and entirely dependent on the mercy of the woman they threw away. They had nothing left to offer and nothing left to leverage. I reached up and pressed a finger against the discreet wireless earpiece resting in my left ear. "Elias," I said. "Yes, Ms. James," Elias replied instantly, his voice crisp in my ear. "We are finished in the VIP suite," I instructed. "The acquisition is closed." "Understood." The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. Elias entered, flanked by 4 massive security operatives wearing dark suits and tactical earpieces. They moved into the room with practiced military precision, fanning out to cover the exits. "My new subsidiary's former chief executive officer and his guests are now trespassing," I announced, looking directly at Tyler. "Escort them out of the building." Tyler snapped his head up. "You cannot throw me out of this party. I am family." "You are a liability," I corrected. "And you are a civilian. Remove them, Elias." The security operatives moved forward. 2 men flanked Tyler, grabbing him firmly by the elbows. He tried to jerk away, but the guards' grips were iron. One operative stepped toward Richard, gesturing toward the door. Another approached Brenda, who was staring at me with a look of profound, absolute horror. "Madison, please," Brenda wailed as the guard placed a hand on her arm. "You cannot do this. We are your parents. Where are we supposed to go?" "Go home, Brenda," I replied, turning my back on her and walking toward the glass wall, looking down at the gala. "The house is yours. Enjoy the quiet." Elias operatives did not allow any further debate. They marched Tyler, Richard, and Brenda toward the heavy double doors. Tyler continued to curse, hurling futile insults over his shoulder. Brenda sobbed loudly. Richard walked with his head bowed, staring at the floor. I stood by the soundproof glass, watching the reflection of my family being forcibly removed from my empire. The heavy doors clicked shut, sealing the boardroom. The ambient silence returned to the suite. David walked over and picked up the manila folder containing the signed confession and the non-compete agreement. He locked it inside his secure briefcase. The shadow debt was paid. The leverage was secured. The golden child was neutralized. I looked down at the main floor of the gala. Hundreds of people were waiting for the founder of Artemis Logistics to deliver the keynote address. The minor and major conflicts were resolved, but the final psychological boundary required a public seal. I needed to walk down that sweeping glass staircase and deliver a message that would cement my total independence. The final layer of poetic justice was waiting on the stage. I stood by the reinforced glass wall of the VIP suite and watched Elias security detail march my family toward the rear exit of the boardroom. The process was swift and clinical. Tyler dragged his feet, his face flushed dark with venom. Brenda leaned heavily against Richard, her sobs visibly racking her shoulders, though the soundproof engineering swallowed the noise. Richard kept his eyes trained firmly on the carpet. They passed through a secondary secure door leading to the service elevators. The heavy primary doors of the boardroom swung open for me. I stepped out onto the landing of the sweeping glass staircase. Below me, the chaotic energy of the Artemis Logistics Gala pulsed through the venue. The music shifted a subtle lowering of the bass, indicating the keynote address was imminent. The crowd of tech journalists, venture capitalists, and local politicians began to converge around the main stage, bathed in soft blue spotlights. I paused on the top step. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald suit and took a slow, measured breath. The air smelled of expensive catering and triumph. Down on the floor, the event coordinator caught sight of me. She signaled the audiovisual team. A single, crisp spotlight cut through the ambient darkness of the room, hitting the top of the glass staircase. Hundreds of faces turned upward. The low murmur of conversation evaporated, replaced by a sudden electric silence. Then the applause started. It began near the stage, rippling outward until the entire pavilion echoed with the deafening roar of hundreds of power brokers validating my existence. I descended the stairs. Each step felt deliberate. Each click of my heels against the glass treads severed another invisible thread connecting me to the past. I was no longer the forgotten daughter waiting for a delayed birthday text. I was the architect of a billion-dollar entity. As I reached the bottom landing, I allowed myself one final glance upward. Through the massive glass wall of the VIP suite floating high above the main floor, I could see the service elevator lobby. Elias and his operatives had stalled the descent, waiting for clearance from the ground team. Tyler, Brenda, and Richard stood trapped behind the reinforced glass. The cinematic juxtaposition was profound. The golden child, the enabler, and the accomplice were physically boxed inside a soundproof cage, looking down at the spectacle. They could see the blinding spotlight tracking my movements. They could see the sea of industry titans clapping. They could see the magnitude of the empire they tried to manipulate. They were forced to bear witness to my absolute, unassailable power, while they waited to be thrown out with the trash. I turned away from the glass cage and walked toward the stage. The applause swelled as I stepped up to the acrylic podium. I adjusted the microphone. The venue quieted, settling into a heavy, respectful silence. I looked out over the crowd. I recognized early investors who risked capital on a theoretical algorithm. I saw software engineers who worked 90-hour weeks to build the back-end framework. I saw the chosen family I had assembled piece by piece in the shadows. "Thank you," I began, my voice carrying clear and steady through the massive speaker array. "Thank you all for being here to witness the launch of Artemis Logistics on the public market." A polite wave of clapping rippled through the front rows. When I conceptualized the foundational architecture for this company, I continued gripping the edges of the podium. I did not have access to massive seed rounds or prestigious industry connections. 10 years ago, I sat in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Southeast Portland, eating a $3 grocery store cupcake, listening to the rain hit the window. A soft chuckle moved through the audience, appreciating the classic startup origin story. Up in the glass box, Brenda pressed her hands against the window. She remembered the cupcake. She remembered the missed birthdays. The narrative was locking into place. "I built Artemis Logistics in the dark," I said. my tone shifting from conversational to authoritative. I built it without safety nets, without bailouts, and without compromised ethics. We constructed a platform based on transparency and resilience. We prioritized sustainable growth over phantom metrics and artificial hype. We built something designed to last. I paused, scanning the room, making direct eye contact with my lead developers and board members. You do not build an empire alone. I stated the words resonating with absolute conviction. The success of Artemis Logistics belongs to the people who recognized the value of this vision before it was profitable. This was the moment of ultimate boundary setting. This was the public seal on the private execution. In the tech industry, the IPO keynote address serves as a founder's historical record. It is the moment you publicly acknowledge the forces that shaped your journey. Every journalist in the room had their recorders running. Every major financial blog was live streaming the speech. I want to personally thank Marcus and David, I said, gesturing to my executive team near the front row. Your brilliant strategic navigation guided us through the complex legal and financial currents of this launch. I want to thank the engineering team for refusing to compromise on the code. I want to thank Apex Ventures for providing the crucial Series A funding when the market was uncertain. I listed the mentors, the advisors, the early adopters, and the administrative staff. I spent 4 minutes detailing the specific contributions of the individuals who formed my professional spine. I conspicuously, deliberately, and surgically omitted my family. I did not thank my parents for their support. I did not mention a brother who inspired my competitive drive. I did not offer a generic platitude about the importance of family foundations. I excised them from the historical record with cold, calculating precision. To the journalists recording the speech, to the industry analysts watching the stream, and to the politicians standing in the room, I was a self-made woman who arrived at the summit entirely on her own merits. I was a solitary force of nature. The James family did not exist in the Artemis narrative. They were officially redacted. Up in the VIP elevator lobby, the reality of the omission struck Tyler. He slapped his hands flat against the soundproof glass, his face contorted in a silent scream of outrage. He realized I was not just taking his company and his career, I was taking his legacy. I was publicly erasing his existence, ensuring nobody in the tech community would ever associate his name with my success. He lunged toward the glass, attempting to pound his fists against the pane to draw attention from the crowd below. He wanted to cause a scene. He wanted to disrupt the narrative. Elias operatives reacted instantly. 2 guards secured Tyler's arms, pinning them behind his back with practiced, non-lethal force. A 3rd guard stepped in front of Brenda and Richard, guiding them firmly toward the open doors of the heavy freight elevator. Tyler thrashed against the security detail, his mouth wide open, yelling words I could not hear. The guards marched him backward, stepping into the steel interior of the service lift. Brenda and Richard followed, their heads bowed, disappearing into the industrial box. The metal doors slid shut, cutting off the view. They were gone, ejected down the freight shaft, destined for the damp alleyway behind the venue, to stand next to the commercial dumpsters. I turned back to the microphone. The crowd remained rapt, unaware of the silent drama that had just concluded in the glass box above them. The logistics industry requires precision, I said, delivering the final lines of my address. It requires the ability to identify broken supply chains, eliminate toxic inefficiencies, and route resources toward sustainable destinations. Tonight, Artemis Logistics proved our algorithms work. Tomorrow, we redefine the global standard. Thank you. The crowd erupted into a standing ovation. The applause felt different this time. It felt clean. It felt earned. I stepped away from the podium and descended the stage stairs. The event coordinator handed me a fresh glass of sparkling water. I navigated the floor, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and posing for photographs with institutional investors. The rest of the night blurred into a sequence of professional victories. Hours later, the gala concluded. The catering staff began breaking down the tables. The journalists packed up their lighting equipment. The valets cleared the line of luxury vehicles from the curb. I rode in the back of my town car, returning to my penthouse apartment. The Portland rain had finally stopped, leaving the city streets slick and reflective under the streetlights. I stepped into my quiet apartment, slipping off my emerald suit jacket and tossing my heels aside. The adrenaline of the evening began to fade, replaced by a deep, profound exhaustion. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of cold water. My personal cell phone buzzed on the granite counter. I looked at the screen. The immediate aftermath of the gala was attempting to breach my sanctuary. The notifications piled up in rapid succession. 7 missed calls from Tyler, 5 voicemails from Brenda, a barrage of frantic text messages filling the screen. The internal conflict sparked a familiar, conditioned reflex. A ghost of the old guilt whispered in the back of my mind, telling me to answer the phone, telling me to absorb their anger, telling me to manage their emotional fallout. But the trained reflex crashed against the bedrock of my newly established reality. I had earned the right to be free. I did not owe them an explanation. I did not owe them closure. I picked up the phone and opened the voicemail application. I did not listen to the messages. I created a new digital folder on my encrypted server. I labeled it Legal Harassment Documentation. I selected all the frantic, weeping, enraged voicemails and transferred them into the secure folder. A final nod to the meticulous, paperwork-driven nature that saved my life. I opened the family group chat. Tyler had sent 20 text messages accusing me of destroying his life. Brenda had sent paragraphs of manipulative guilt trips, claiming I had humiliated them in front of the city. Richard had sent a single word: why? I placed my fingers on the keyboard and typed a single final response. The debt is paid. The lien is cleared. The transaction is complete. Never contact me again. I hit send. Then I navigated to the contact settings. I blocked Tyler's number. I blocked Brenda's number. I blocked Richard's number. I deleted the group chat entirely. The digital tethers snapped. The boundary was permanently sealed. I set the phone down on the granite counter. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sleeping city. I raised my glass of cold water to the dark skyline. The satisfaction of absolute silence washed over me, a stark, beautiful contrast to the heavy, oppressive silence of my 30th birthday. The war was over, but the final mathematical equations of the family ledger still needed time to settle. The ultimate poetic justice required a few months to fully mature. And when the dust finally cleared, the reality of untouchable indifference would prove more devastating than any explosive revenge. 6 months dissolved into the warm Oregon spring. The damp gray skies of November surrendered to crisp, clear mornings. Artemis Logistics did not just survive the initial public offering, we dictated the market. By April, our stock split. My net worth settled securely into the 10-figure range. The frantic adrenaline of the gala faded, transforming into the steady, unstoppable momentum of an industry titan. I sat in my penthouse drinking black espresso, reviewing the quarterly earnings report. The board of directors trusted my vision. The financial media praised my operational efficiency. The dust had finally settled over the battlefield, leaving the new reality standing in sharp relief. The mathematical equation of the James family reached its final, inevitable equilibrium. I did not need to actively ruin Tyler. The paperwork did the heavy lifting. The permanent non-compete agreement acted as an invisible electric fence around his career. He tried to secure interviews at minor software startups in Seattle and Austin. He thought he could outsmart the contract. He thought Aegis Holdings would not monitor his movements. He was wrong. David kept a dedicated alert system active. The moment Tyler submitted a resume to a tech firm, my legal counsel sent a polite, certified letter to his prospective employer containing a copy of the non-compete. The interviews vanished. Tyler could not pivot to venture capital. He could not consult. He could not touch a line of code for profit. The handwritten confession of federal wire fraud hung over his head like a guillotine blade, waiting for him to step out of line. Without the tech industry, Tyler possessed no marketable skills. The swaggering founder who leased luxury vehicles and promised 9-figure exits now worked as a floor manager at a mid-tier electronics retail store in a suburban shopping mall. He spent his days wearing a branded polo shirt and a plastic name tag, selling extended warranties on flat-screen televisions to bored homeowners. He stood under harsh fluorescent lights, listening to customers complain about return policies. He drove a 10-year-old used sedan. The golden child lived his darkest nightmare. He became ordinary. The fate of my parents required a more nuanced approach. I did not evict them. Throwing them onto the street would have allowed them to play the victims. Brenda would have spun a tragic narrative for her country club friends, weeping about a cruel, ungrateful daughter. I refused to grant them that martyrdom. Instead, I instructed Aegis Holdings to officially purchase the Lake Oswego property from the Shadow Bank. I held the deed. I became their landlord. I allowed Brenda and Richard to remain in their sanctuary, but their continued residence came with a legally binding lease agreement drafted by David and delivered via courier. The terms were non-negotiable. They were required to maintain the landscaping, pay the utility bills, and adhere to standard tenant guidelines. The rent, however, was the true architecture of my poetic justice. I set the monthly rent at exactly $1. But the lease stipulated the payment could not be processed through an automated bank transfer. The payment could not be made in cash. The terms required a physical paper check written out in blue ink and mailed to my corporate headquarters by the first of every month. The payee line carried a very specific title. Every 4 weeks, Richard sat at his pristine marble kitchen island, the same island where he once denied me $500 for a broken laptop, claiming he only invested in guaranteed returns. He pulled out his checkbook. He picked up a cheap ballpoint pen. He was forced to write out the amount of $1. And then he had to write the destination, the Madison James Scholarship Fund for Unrecognized Women in Technology. That single dollar bill cost him more than a luxury mortgage. It was a recurring physical acknowledgement of his profound failure. Every 30 days, he had to sign his name and send a microscopic tribute to the daughter he ignored. He had to fund the very concept of overlooked women. He could not escape the transaction. If he missed a payment by a single day, the lease terminated and the eviction process commenced. He folded the check, placed it in an envelope, adhered a stamp, and walked it to the mailbox. A monthly pilgrimage of defeat. Brenda remained trapped inside the walls of her perfect house. The structure was identical, but the soul of the property belonged to me. She could not host her charity luncheons without knowing her guests were standing on floors owned by the child she dismissed. She could not brag about her son because her son sold audio cables at the mall. The social standing she prized above human life evaporated. They lived in a gilded cage built by their own arrogance and secured by my capital. The ultimate victory did not arrive in a boardroom or a courtroom. It arrived on a Friday afternoon in late May, my 31st birthday. 1 year ago, I sat in a dark apartment eating a wax-flavored cupcake, staring at a silent phone. Today, the environment looked remarkably different. I stood on the teak deck of a chartered yacht cruising the deep blue waters of the Columbia River. The spring sun warmed my shoulders. The breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh water. I wore a simple white linen dress, leaving the emerald executive armor in my closet. I did not need armor today. I was not alone. 30 people occupied the deck of the yacht. These were not venture capitalists or politicians. They were my chosen family. David stood near the stern, laughing at a joke Marcus just delivered. My lead software engineers clinked bottles of imported beer. The event coordinator from the gala chatted with my marketing director. I had surrounded myself with people who valued my mind, respected my boundaries, and celebrated my existence without requiring a collateral transaction. A steward carried a large bakery box onto the upper deck. He opened the cardboard flaps, revealing the contents. It was not a multi-tiered fondant pastry designed for photographs. It was a genuine 3-layer dark chocolate cake covered in rich whipped ganache and fresh local berries. The kind of dessert meant to be consumed and enjoyed. 30 voices joined together singing the traditional birthday song. The sound drifted over the water, loud and joyful. I blew out the candles in a single breath. I walked over to the starboard railing, resting my elbows on the polished wood. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. For a decade, this date brought a familiar, hollow ache, a conditioned waiting period, a toxic hope that maybe this year the screen would light up with a message from Lake Oswego. Maybe this year they would remember the date. I unlocked the screen. The notification center was full. Text messages from peers in the industry, emails from board members wishing me a prosperous new year, calendar alerts for upcoming philanthropic events. I scanned the digital list. The blocked numbers remained blocked. The family group chat remained deleted. The silence from my parents was no longer a symptom of their neglect. It was a condition of my design. I looked at the phone and waited for the old familiar sting of rejection. I waited for the sadness that used to define my childhood. It never arrived. I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, no lingering desire to prove them wrong. The emotional tether was truly severed. I realized in that bright sunlit moment that I no longer cared if Brenda and Richard thought of me today. Their opinions held the exact same weight as a stranger passing me on the street. 0. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The math of family loyalty is a rigged game, designed to keep the scapegoat balancing a ledger that will never clear. You can spend your entire life trying to pay down an emotional debt you did not incur. You can shrink yourself to fit inside their narrow expectations. Or you can stop auditing their books and start building your own empire. I turned my back on the river and walked toward my friends. Marcus handed me a slice of the dark chocolate cake on a porcelain plate. The taste was rich, authentic, and sweet. The best revenge is not financial ruin. It is not a dramatic confrontation in a glass boardroom. The best revenge is waking up one morning and realizing the people who tried to break you do not cross your mind at all. I had achieved the rarest and most expensive luxury in the world: absolute, untouchable indifference. There is a silent, invisible ledger kept in the heart of every home. It is not written in ink, nor is it stored on a secure corporate server. It is recorded in the quiet spaces between spoken words, in the allocation of time, and in the distribution of grace. For decades, the traditional American family structure has been held up as the gold standard of safety and moral development. We are taught that the home is a sanctuary, a place where children are nurtured to step out into the competitive machinery of the world with a foundation of unshakable support. But the story of the James family reveals the dark, creeping rot that occurs when that traditional structure is hollowed out by vanity. Brenda and Richard James did not set out to build a criminal or to alienate a billionaire. They simply fell victim to a uniquely American distortion of parenting, the belief that a child's outward material success is the ultimate reflection of the parent's worth. In a culture that endlessly glorifies the prodigy, the startup founder, and the Ivy League standout, it is dangerously easy for parents to lose their emotional bearing. They look at their children and stop seeing human beings who require guidance, boundary setting, and emotional awareness. Instead, they see extensions of their own egos. Tyler became the vessel for Brenda's social standing in Lake Oswego and Richard's desire for a legacy. They crowned him the golden child, but in doing so, they stripped him of the most vital gift a parent can provide: the gift of consequences. When we shield our children from the discomfort of failure, we do not protect them, we disarm them. By constantly bailing Tyler out, buying the luxury cars, funding the doomed ventures, and eventually horrifically colluding in a federal felony to protect his fragile facade, Brenda and Richard taught their son that the rules of fairness and honesty simply did not apply to him. They weaponized his entitlement. A child raised without the concept of accountability will inevitably grow into an adult who views other people, even his own parents, as disposable collateral. Tyler's willingness to let his father go to federal prison was not an anomaly. It was the direct mathematical result of 30 years of parental enabling. On the opposite end of this toxic spectrum sits the scapegoat, Madison's trajectory offers a profound lesson in the devastating cost of emotional neglect. To her parents, Madison was an afterthought, an underperforming asset who did not warrant the investment of their time or their capital. The forgotten birthdays, the denial of a simple laptop repair, the quiet dismissals. These were not acts of physical violence, but they were acts of profound emotional erasure. In traditional family dynamics, fairness does not necessarily mean giving every child the exact same thing at the exact same time. But it absolutely requires an equitable distribution of emotional awareness. It requires looking at the quiet child sitting in the corner and recognizing that their silence is not always a sign of contentment. Sometimes it is the sound of a child learning to survive without you. Madison built resilience, yes. She forged an empire out of the shadows. But the tragedy of the scapegoat is that their greatest strengths are usually born out of their deepest wounds. No child should have to learn the mechanics of absolute self-reliance by enduring the heartbreak of an empty dining room table on their 30th birthday. Parenting, at its core, is a long-term act of stewardship. It is the grueling, unglamorous work of teaching honesty when lying is easier. It is enforcing fairness when favoritism is tempting. It is looking your child in the eye and allowing them to fail, to fall, and to feel the sting of their own mistakes so that they might learn how to stand back up with integrity. Brenda and Richard failed this fundamental duty. They traded the hard work of character building for the cheap thrill of neighborhood prestige. And when the illusion finally collapsed, they found themselves trapped in a boardroom, begging on their knees, entirely dependent on the mercy of the daughter they had thrown away. This dynamic is not isolated to corporate boardrooms or sprawling suburban estates. It happens in living rooms and kitchens across the country. It happens every time a parent dismisses one child's art project to praise another child's athletic trophy. It happens every time a boundary is erased to keep the peace. The story of Madison and Tyler is a magnified reflection of the micro-betrayals that happen in families every single day. If you have ever felt the sting of that unbalanced ledger, if you have ever been the child forced to shrink so someone else could shine, or if you simply appreciate the profound satisfaction of watching the scales of justice balance themselves, then you belong here with us. Subscribe and follow the channel Aura Vengeance. We explore the quiet boundaries, the untold betrayals, and the moments when dignity finally gets the last word. Join our community and share your own stories in the comments below. As we look back at the wreckage of the James family, the ultimate lesson lingers in the quiet aftermath. True family responsibility cannot be bought, forged, or faked. It must be cultivated in the light of honesty. Today, Richard sits at his marble kitchen island on the first of every month, uncapping a cheap pen to write a $1 check to a scholarship fund for unrecognized women. He folds it into an envelope, a mandatory tribute to the empire his daughter built without him. He lives in a beautiful home, but it is a home completely devoid of warmth, haunted by the echoing consequences of his own conditional love. Meanwhile, Madison sails on a sunlit river, surrounded by the family she chose, insulated by her wealth and her hard-won peace. She has achieved absolute, untouchable indifference. She no longer waits for a text message. She no longer looks for their approval. She is free. And yet, as the yacht cuts through the deep blue water, one must wonder about the nature of that silence. Indifference is a powerful shield, but it is still a shield forged from the metal of an abandoned childhood. You can successfully sever the ties, you can balance the ledger, and you can walk away from the people who broke you. But the ghost of the family you were supposed to have, the parents who should have remembered, the brother who should have been a friend, always leaves a faint, indelible shadow. We can escape the house, but we are forever shaped by the weather we survived inside it.